I had been staring at my brother's Facebook profile for almost an hour without realizing it, scrolling up and down the same post while my chest felt tight and my head refused to slow down. It had been a year since he died, and even after all that time, his page still felt like the only place where he existed in some form that hadn't been erased completely. The room was quiet, too quiet for a city apartment at night, and the light from the laptop was the only thing keeping the space from feeling empty. I wasn't looking for anything specific, and I wasn't expecting surprises because his profile had been frozen for months with no changes, no new activity, and no signs of life. Lauren came out the bathroom while drying her hands, stopped when she saw the screen, and let out a slow breath that sounded tired rather than annoyed. She told me I shouldn't keep doing this to myself, that going back there only made things worse. But I answered that it was the anniversary and that I just needed a few more minutes before closing everything. She looked at me for a moment, then asked if I wanted something to eat and said she would go out to get food anyway. When the door closed behind her, the apartment felt even quieter, and I finally moved the mouse to close the browser. That was when the page refreshed by itself. A new post appeared at the top of the profile without warning, without loading, and without any explanation that made sense. My eyes locked onto the image before my mind had time to react, and my body immediately pulled back from the desk. The photo showed my brother close to the camera, his face soaked in blood, his eyes wide open and fixed straight ahead as if he had been forced to stare. The blood didn't look staged or edited, and the expression on his face wasn't neutral or empty, because it carried fear and anger mixed together in a way that made my stomach twist. I checked the name, the username, the friends list, and every detail that would confirm it wasn't real, but everything matched his account exactly. Then I noticed the small green dot next to his name that said active now, and my hands started shaking so badly that I had to place them on my legs. Before I could process that, a message notification appeared on the screen. I didn't open it right away because part of me hoped it would disappear if I waited long enough. When it didn't, I clicked, "Brother, please help me, save me." My chair slid back as I stood up too fast, my heart beating hard enough to hurt. I walked to the bathroom, splashed water on my face, and told myself that grief could do this, that my head was breaking under pressure. When I went back to the room, the laptop was still on. The profile picture hadn't changed. The image was closer now, and my brother's face filled most of the frame with more blood running down his skin and into his clothes. His eyes looked strained as if he had been staring without blinking for a long time, and the longer I looked, the harder it became to breathe normally. Nothing happened for several seconds, and that waiting felt worse than action because my body stayed tense and ready to react while my mind raced through possibilities. Another message arrived slowly, letter by letter. "It hurts. You left me there." I reached for the power cord and pulled it from the wall with shaking hands, watching the screen go black while my heart continued racing. I stood there holding the cable, listening to the silence, trying to calm down. The laptop turned on by itself. The startup sound felt painfully loud, and the screen lit up without asking for anything, already showing Facebook open on my brother's profile. His face was closer again, distorted and stretched, and a low sound came from the speakers that made my throat tighten. Before anything else happened, I froze in place, watched image shift as if he was moving forward, frame by frame without stopping. His mouth opened, his eyes focused directly on me, and the ground grew louder. I ran to the door and tried to open it, pulling the handle hard while my breath came out uneven and fast. The door didn't move, and the sound behind me became wet and heavy, like something dragging itself forward. When I turned around, my brother's head was already pushing out of the screen, bending the monitor outward as if it were soft. Blood smeared along the edge as his shoulders followed, and his arms reached forward with movements that looked wrong and uncontrolled. Before he fully came out, there was a moment where he stayed half inside the screen, staring at me with a look that mixed anger and pain so strongly that my legs felt weak. Then his body dropped to the floor, and he stood up far too quickly. He crossed the room in seconds and grabbed my arms with a grip that hurt immediately. his fingers digging into my skin while blood soaked through his clothes and onto the carpet. His face was close to mine, and his voice came out loud and raw. "This was your fault. You killed me." He screamed each word directly into my face while shaking me, his grip tightening every time I tried to pull away. I could barely keep my balance, and my arms felt useless under his strength. That's when I heard Lauren yelling from outside the apartment, asking why the door was locked and what was wrong. My brother's expression changed, his grip loosened, and his body jerked as if something was pulling him away. I twisted the handle again, and this time, the door opened. I stumbled forward and grabbed Lauren, holding onto her while my body shook uncontrollably and my breathing refused to slow down. She asked what happened, what I saw, and why my arms were red, but I couldn't explain anything in a way that sounded sane. When I looked back into the apartment, the room was empty, the laptop was off, and there was no sign of blood or damage anywhere. Lauren stayed close to me that night, watching me carefully while I barely slept. The days that followed were heavy and tense, filled with constant fear that something would happen again. Every sound made me flinch, and every notification made my chest tighten. Before the next breakdown, there was no relief, only waiting and exhaustion. I started therapy because I couldn't keep pretending everything was normal. The therapist asked me about my brother, about the accident, about the guilt I tried to avoid talking about. Saying it out loud felt worse than any image or message. I told her I was driving that night, that I was distracted, and that I didn't handle the turn correctly. I admitted that my brother wasn't wearing a seatbelt and that I never insisted, even though I knew better. I explained that the impact threw him forward and there was nothing anyone could do after that. My chest felt tight as I spoke, and my hands shook the entire time. The therapist listened without interrupting and explained that guilt doesn't disappear when it's ignored because it looks for ways to come back stronger. After that session, the messages stopped. I no longer opened my brother's Facebook profile, and I removed everything connected to it from my phone and computer. I think about my brother every day, and that hasn't changed, but the fear has settled into something heavier and quieter. I still don't know what happened that night. I refuse to believe it was all in my head. When he touched me, I realized that it was real. No one will understand me, but what came out of that screen was a message from the dead. The first thing you need to understand is that nothing about me suggested I was the kind of man this would happen to, and that belief is exactly what made everything worse. I worked in an office, a regular job. I didn't think danger came from places like my desk, my apartment, or a casual conversation near the printer. Marla joined the company in early February, a few days before Valentine's Day. She wasn't loud, didn't dress to stand out, and didn't try to force herself into conversations. When she spoke, she did it softly, carefully, like she was always afraid of saying the wrong thing. That made people lower their voices around her, including me. She started talking to me after a few days, usually about work at first, then about small personal things like food she liked or shows she watched. I thought she was very pretty, and I knew she was single. Before asking her out, I told myself not to overthink it, not to assign meaning where there wasn't any, and not to expect anything more than a simple drink after work. Valentine's Day made it feel like a good excuse and actually a romantic idea. When I invited her, she smiled in a way that looked relieved, and she agreed immediately. The bar was close to my apartment, quiet enough to talk without raising our voices. We stayed longer than planned, and the conversation never stalled, which made me relax more than I should have. She laughed easily, asked questions that felt personal without being invasive, and kept telling me how comfortable she felt around me. When the bar closed, I offered her the couch without much thought, mostly because it felt awkward to send her home late. She accepted quickly as if she had already expected the offer. That should have stood out to me, but at the time, it just felt like chemistry. In the morning, I woke up to the sound of movement in my kitchen, which immediately put me on edge because I live alone and I am not used to hearing anyone else in my space. Marla was already dressed, cooking breakfast, moving confidently through my apartment like she knew where everything was. I felt surprised and slightly uncomfortable, but I didn't say anything because I didn't want to seem ungrateful or rude. She left later that day, kissed my cheek casually, and said she would text me. I watched her walk away and told myself it had just been a good date, nothing more. That weekend I went out with friends like I used to, but I kept thinking about how fast everything had happened, even though I didn't fully admit it to myself. I tried to convince myself that I was just nervous because it had been a while since I dated anyone seriously. When I got home late that night and unlocked my door, I immediately knew something was wrong because the lights were on and the TV was playing, even though I was certain I had turned everything off before leaving. My body reacted before my mind did, and I froze in the doorway listening. Marla was sitting on my couch wearing comfortable clothes, watching television like it was the most natural thing in the world. When I asked how she got inside, my voice came out tighter than I expected, and she responded calmly saying she had made a copy of my key earlier, asking if that was okay like it was a small favor. I felt very confused and somewhat nervous. I told her that was too much, that we were moving too fast and that she should have asked me first. She nodded, apologized softly, and then asked what I wanted for dinner, completely ignoring the fact that I was visibly shaken. She stayed the entire weekend. Every time I tried to bring up the conversation again, she redirected it, smiled, or acted hurt enough to make me back off. I started feeling trapped inside my own apartment, sleeping lightly, locking my bedroom door at night, and listening for movement. By Monday, I was exhausted, anxious, and desperate for distance, believing that work would create a barrier she couldn't cross. That illusion shattered the moment I saw her at the office, standing confidently among coworkers, laughing and touching people's arms while telling stories. When I approached the group, the mood shifted immediately, and several coworkers congratulated me, mentioning how happy they were for us. My confusion turned into dread when Marla casually said we were a couple and that we were planning a future together. She spoke about marriage like it was a scheduled task, saying she was just waiting for me to propose and that she trusted I would do it soon. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears, and my hands started shaking in a way I couldn't control. I asked her to talk after work, barely holding myself together for the rest of the day. Outside, I finally said everything I had been holding back, explaining that we were not together, that I never agreed to any of this, and that she needed to return the key and to leave me alone. Her reaction was immediate and intense. Her face hardened, her breathing became shallow, and her voice dropped when she told me I was humiliating her. After that, she stopped speaking to me entirely, and the silence felt heavier rather than relieving. Weeks passed with no interaction, and I slowly began to relax, thinking the situation had resolved itself. But the worst was yet to come. It all started on one of our coworkers' birthdays. I attended, confident that Marla wouldn't be there. She had been very isolated in recent weeks and didn't even have a relationship with the birthday guy. We heard a scream echo through the room, sharp enough to silence everyone. Marla stood outside the bathroom, shaking, crying, barely able to speak, saying one of our coworkers had attacked her and that she defended herself. Inside, the man lay unconscious on the floor. The room filled with panic, shouting, and fear, and people immediately surrounded her, offering comfort and support. I felt guilt rise in my chest, thinking that maybe my rejection had pushed her into something traumatic. That thought ate at me, and I started checking on her, walking her home and staying close, believing I was helping someone fragile. Without asking, she moved back into my apartment. This time, she didn't even pretend it was temporary. She was cheerful, energetic, and disturbingly unaffected by what had happened. The man was hospitalized, unconscious, and she talked about it like it was already behind her. The disconnect terrified me. I slept less, avoided being alone with her when possible, and started feeling watched even when she wasn't in the room. One day, 2 police officers knocked on my door. They were asking for Marla by name. They explained everything carefully, telling me that the hospitalized man had woken up, spoken to them, and denied every accusation. The security footage confirmed his story. showing Marla following him, drugging his drink, and attacking him. As they spoke, Marla appeared behind me, calm and smiling as if this was just another inconvenience. When they arrested her, she didn't struggle. She looked at me and said, "Love required commitment, and commitment required action." I felt sick, dizzy, and ashamed, realizing how close I had come to being the next person she framed or harmed. Valentine's Day still arrives every year, but now it feels like a warning rather than a celebration. I learned that danger doesn't always come loudly or violently at first. Sometimes it comes quietly, smiling, and already holding a copy of your key. The first time I realized something was wrong, I was already staring at the screen and couldn't look away. That moment didn't feel exciting or mysterious. It felt heavy, like my body understood something my head refused to accept. I had always been curious about things people warned others not to touch. Not because I felt special, but because I hated not knowing. If something existed, I needed proof. That habit followed me into adulthood, especially during nights when I stayed awake watching YouTube videos about obscure parts of the internet. I didn't talk about it with my friends or family. Those videos became something private, something I watched with headphones on, replaying details and comments. The deep web wasn't presented as fantasy there, but as structure, a system that rewarded patience and obsession. What caught my attention the most was red rooms, not because of the violence, but because nobody could prove they were real. I didn't want horror. I wanted confirmation. I started slowly using basic tools that anyone could find with enough searching. Most nights ended the same way, with blank pages and dead links that led nowhere. That didn't frustrate me because it matched what the videos explained. Real things were hidden behind repetition and time. I found black markets, forums, and video directories that felt wrong but unimpressive. Everything looked transactional and cold. I never interacted with anyone. I stayed invisible, just observing, telling myself that was enough. Red rooms never appeared. Weeks passed without a trace, and part of me started thinking they were just another myth recycled for views. Still, I kept searching, night after night, following the same routine. Then one night, a red room appeared at the top of an empty page. It didn't load or animate. Before clicking anything, I sat back and tried to calm my breathing because my body reacted faster than my thoughts. My heart wasn't racing, but there was pressure in my chest that didn't fade. I checked the room, the door, the window, even though it made no sense. The red room asked a simple question about entering. No explanation followed, and that made it worse. I clicked yes, expecting something dramatic, but the same question appeared again, identical in every way. I hesitated, then clicked yes once more. The repetition started to bother me, not because it felt fake, but because it felt deliberate. Every time I answered, the page refreshed instantly, as if someone was waiting for that response. I told myself I could stop any time, but I didn't. When the room finally disappeared, nothing replaced it. No loading screen, no confirmation. I waited, staring at the screen until my eyes hurt, then shut the laptop and went to bed without sleeping. The next evening, when someone knocked on my door, I didn't know if it was influenced by my experience yesterday, but I was a little worried. I stayed quiet for several seconds, standing close enough to hear movement outside. A voice said my name and mentioned a delivery. It sounded normal, but my hands tightened around the door handle anyway. The moment I opened the door, everything collapsed into chaos. Hands grabbed my arms with force that didn't allow resistance. Another hand covered my mouth hard enough to hurt my jaw. I tried to scream, but no sound escaped. They moved fast and efficiently, like they had done this before. A hood went over my head and something solid pressed against my face, cutting off air. My wrists were pulled behind my back and secured tightly, making my shoulders burn. I was dragged into a vehicle and pushed down onto the seat. Someone kept pressure on my head while the car started moving. No one spoke, and the silence made it worse than threats ever could. I lost track of time as the car sped through turns. Breathing became harder, slower, until everything faded out. When I woke up, the first thing I noticed was the position of my body, because I couldn't move. My wrists were tied to a chair, my ankles secured, my back forced straight. Panic didn't explode immediately. It built slowly as I tested every restraint and failed. Bright lights blinded me, aimed directly at my face. I tried to look away, but my head was pulled back roughly by someone standing behind me. My vision adjusted enough to see cameras placed around the room, all pointed at me. A screen turned on in front of me, filling with usernames and numbers that kept changing. I understood what it was before my mind could deny it. This wasn't a video archive. It was live. Men moved in and out of my view, faces covered, gestures calm and methodical. One of them adjusted a camera. Another checked the screen, nodding slowly. Requests appeared on the screen, and they followed them carefully, step by step, making sure everything was visible. They waited after each action, watching reactions, adjusting angles, continuing without hesitation. My body reacted before my voice did. I cried, begged, tried to explain anything that could make this stop. Nothing changed. This wasn't punishment or revenge. It was scheduled. I couldn't believe what I was experiencing. My curiosity about red rooms led me to this place as the protagonist. I just wanted to observe, but now I am the object. They began using devices meant to control pain precisely, not to end anything quickly. One of them placed clamps on my arms and legs, tightening them until my muscles locked and my hands lost strength. Another adjusted the chair again so my feet barely touched the floor, forcing my weight onto my shoulders and lower back. Every time my body tried to shift or resist, they corrected it immediately, tightening something else, pushing me back into position so the cameras never lost sight of my face. And after that, they focused on keeping me responsive. They poured cold water over my head without warning, then left me sitting there shaking while the light stayed fixed on my eyes. When my breathing slowed, one of them struck my leg hard enough to make my body jerk, not once, but repeatedly, waiting between each hit to make sure I stayed awake. The last thing I remember clearly was my vision narrowing as the lights stayed fixed on me. When consciousness returned, it came in fragments. My body felt heavy and unresponsive, and my thoughts refused to connect properly. The environment was different, quieter, but I couldn't open my eyes immediately. A voice called my name, repeating it slowly until it broke through the fog in my head. When I finally managed to focus, I saw white walls and medical equipment around me. My throat hurt when I tried to speak, and my hands were free but weak. Someone pressed a button and left the room without explaining anything. I stayed there staring at the ceiling, trying to piece together what was real and what wasn't. But my thoughts kept circling back to the cameras. My mother was sitting next to the bed when I fully woke up. She looked exhausted, like someone who hadn't slept properly in days. When she saw my eyes open, she held my hand tightly and didn't say anything at first. I told her everything in a rush, afraid that if I stopped talking, the memories would slip away. I described the website, the red room, the men, the room, the broadcast. I needed her to believe me. She listened calmly, then told me this wasn't the first time I had told that story. According to her, I had never lived alone, never owned a computer, and had no access to the internet. She said I had been hospitalized before after obsessing over crime cases, always convinced I had been taken somewhere. The doctors called it a recurring episode. I stopped arguing and looked away. I listened to my mother, but I didn't accept what she was saying. After she left the room, I tested my hands, my wrists, my arms, slowly checking everything. I no longer had any wounds, but I am sure that they did not all disappear. I tried to remember everything that happened in the red room, although everything is in fragments. They erased my memory. I'm sure they'll come for me again. I was just another man scrolling through Tinder at night, sitting alone in my apartment killing time because sleep never came easily anymore. My life was simple and predictable. I worked, came home, and filled the silence with my phone. Tinder wasn't hope or romance for me. It was distraction. something that made the hours pass faster when the walls felt too close. That's when I matched with Marla. Her profile stood out without trying too hard. Natural photos, no forced poses, and always the same small dog in her arms. She looked warm, relaxed, and confident in a way that felt real instead of staged. She messaged first, and the conversation flowed without effort. She laughed easily, asked real questions, and complimented me in a way that didn't feel fake. I kept waiting for the moment where it would turn awkward or cold, but it never did. By the end of the night, she suggested meeting in person. We agreed to meet up at a cafe close to her place. Nothing special, just a simple date. I agreed immediately, telling myself that sometimes things just work out. I arrived early to the cafe and spent several minutes pretending to check my phone while watching the door. When Marla walked in, there was no confusion or disappointment. She looked exactly like her photos, but more live, more present, with a smile that felt directed only at me. She spoke with energy, leaned toward me while I talked, and paid attention in a way that made me feel seen. She touched my arm lightly once, just enough to make my chest tighten. I didn't understand why someone like her was sitting across from me, but I didn't question it. After one drink, she suggested leaving the cafe. She said her place was nearby and quieter. There was no hesitation in her voice, no playful pause. I nodded, trying to act calm while my heart beat too fast. Her apartment was clean and oddly empty, with no photos and no personal details. The music played softly while she poured drinks. We sat close on the couch, and when she kissed me, I didn't stop her. Before anything truly happened, I felt something slip. My focus faded, my reactions slowed, and my body stopped responding the way it should have. I tried to speak, but the words wouldn't form properly. The fear didn't hit immediately. At first, it was confusion mixed with embarrassment, like my body was failing me at the worst possible moment. My head felt heavy, my arms weak, and my vision blurred in and out as I struggled to stay upright. I tried to push myself off the couch, but my legs didn't cooperate. My mouth opened, yet the sound that came out was barely a whisper. Marla watched me with patience, her face calm, her posture relaxed, as if this was unfolding exactly as planned. When I woke up, my wrists and ankles were tied tightly to a bed frame. The cords cut into my skin when I moved, and the room around me was unfamiliar and windowless. Panic rose fast, filling my chest until breathing became difficult. I pulled against the restraints, my muscles shaking from effort and fear, while my thoughts raced without direction. I tried to scream again, but my throat felt raw and dry, producing only broken sounds. The door opened slowly, and Marla stepped inside. A man followed her, his head covered with a dark cloth. The door closed behind them with a final sound that made my stomach drop. Before they touched me, they waited. That waiting felt deliberate, like they wanted me fully awake and aware of what was coming. My breathing grew louder, uneven, and impossible to control as my eyes moved between them. The man approached first and grabbed my arm with firm pressure. He pressed a heavy object against my skin and increased the force slowly. Pain spread deep through my arm, sharp enough to force a scream out of me as my body jerked against the restraints. Marla watched closely, her eyes focused, her mouth relaxed. She didn't flinch when I begged or when my voice broke. She nodded once, and the man moved to my legs, repeating the same action until my muscles cramped violently. I cried openly, my face wet, my voice cracking as I asked why this was happening. I told them they had the wrong person, that I didn't know them, that I would do anything to make it stop. Marla laughed softly, not out of humor, but out of satisfaction. She stepped closer and looked directly into my face. "You really don't remember?" "I swear I don't know you." "You remember what you chose to forget." She spoke about the dog, the small white dog, the night I hit it with my car and drove away without stopping. The memory came back with brutal clarity, tightening my chest until it hurt to breathe. I didn't interrupt her. I couldn't. My body shook uncontrollably, not just from pain, but from understanding exactly why I was there. She explained how she found me using cameras, license plates, and weeks of watching my routine. She talked about patience, about planning, and about knowing that someone like me would eventually look for connection online. I knew you would swipe. You always do. The man returned to the bed and twisted my fingers one by one, slow enough to make each movement count. The pain forced screams out of me that I couldn't control, my body arching uselessly against the restraints. I begged again, apologizing repeatedly, promising anything I could think of. My words overlapped and tangled, sounding desperate and weak even to my own ears. Marla leaned close enough that I could feel her breathe. You didn't stop. You didn't look back. They left me there afterward, alone, shaking and exhausted, my body aching everywhere they had touched. When Marla returned, she cut the ropes without ceremony. She didn't apologize or threaten me. She simply told me to get dressed and leave. I fell trying to stand, my legs barely holding me upright. She watched without helping as I struggled toward the door. The hallway outside was empty, cold, and smelled old, like no one truly lived there. Days later, I realized the apartment wasn't hers. The building was abandoned. The Tinder profile disappeared. The phone number stopped working. There was nothing to trace. I thought about reporting everything, but every time I tried to speak, the image of that dog came back, lying broken on the street while I drove away. I deleted Tinder and stopped looking for company online. I avoid driving at night whenever possible, and sudden sounds still make my chest tighten. I don't think of Marla every day, but I never forget her. I don't believe she wanted to kill me. She wanted me to carry it with me, and I deserved it.
My friend Hannah and I decided to celebrate a different kind of Valentine's Day, honoring our friendship without thinking about our broken hearts. It was just a simple girls' night out. But our lives changed completely. Hannah and I have known each other since we were little girls. She was the perfect date. I packed a backpack with cheap wine, snacks, and pajamas and went to Hannah's house because neither of us wanted to be alone that night. We were both recently separated, but that wasn't going to stop us from enjoying the day. The plan was simple. Stay inside, watch movies, and let the night pass without making it a big deal. Couples had already disappeared into their plans, and the street felt empty earlier than usual. We put on a movie, opened the wine, and tried to relax. Half an hour later, we realized we forgot most of the snacks. We laughed it off, grabbed our jackets, and went out, telling ourselves it would only take a few minutes. The walk back from the store should have been forgettable, but something about it stuck with me later. The street was almost silent, until we heard footsteps behind us, close enough to notice, slow enough to make us turn around. It was Ethan, Hannah's neighbor. I recognized him immediately because he always looked like someone trying not to be seen. He smiled too wide when he saw us and asked how we were doing, then asked if we were planning to spend the night alone. The question came out casual, but his eyes stayed fixed on Hannah. He started talking without stopping, explaining that his wife had left him for another man, saying it like a joke, even though his hands kept shaking. He said nights like Valentine's Day made everything worse and that people never understood what betrayal really felt like. Hannah nodded politely and tried to unlock the door while he talked. We told him we were sorry and said we were tired. He finally stepped back, waved, and walked toward his house. We locked the door behind us and stood there for a second longer than necessary. Hannah said he was strange, then shrugged it off, and we went back to the living room. Nothing else happened for a while. Then, a sound came from outside late at night, after the second movie had already started and the wine was almost gone. It wasn't loud, but it was sharp enough to pull my attention away from the screen. Hannah muted the TV, and we both listened without speaking, trying to decide if it was worth reacting. There was a long pause where the house felt exposed, like every wall was thinner than it should have been. I told myself it was probably nothing and stood up, because neither of us wanted to admit We were scared already. I walked to the door and looked through the peephole, seeing only darkness and the empty porch. When I opened the door, Ethan rushed forward so fast I didn't even have time to react. He slammed into the door with his shoulder, forcing his way inside and knocking me backward. The door closed behind him, and the lock clicked before I could even think about running. He had a gun in his hand, and his face looked completely different from earlier. He started yelling immediately, demanding to know where Hannah's ex was, shouting his name over and over. Hannah kept saying he doesn't live there anymore, her voice shaking as she tried to back away. Ethan stepped closer, waving the gun and screaming that he knew the truth, that everyone was lying to him. He accused Hannah's ex of stealing his wife and ruining his life, and he would not listen when she said he wasn't there. He pointed the gun at us and told us to move, and we obeyed because there was nothing else we could do. He forced us down the hallway and into the bedroom, slamming the door shut behind us. He kept pacing while asking the same questions again and again. Hannah lied and said her ex was coming back soon, hoping it would calm him or buy time, but it only made him angrier. Before touching us, he stood there staring, like he was deciding something. That silence was worse than the shouting, because neither of us knew what would happen next. Then he told us to sit on the bed and not look at him. He ordered us to take off our clothes until we were in our underwear, and we did it slowly, shaking so badly it was hard to move. He tied our hands with something thin and rough that burned into our skin, then took out his phone and started filming, laughing and telling us to say his name. He hit Hannah first, then turned to me, moving with intention instead of panic. Every strike felt planned, like he wanted us to remember it. He kept yelling that nobody disrespected him, and that this was what happened to people who took things from him. When he pulled out the lighter, Hannah started crying louder, begging him to stop. He didn't listen. He burned us in short bursts, watching our reactions and laughing like it entertained him. There was a moment when Hannah managed to free one hand, and I saw hope flash across her face before fear took over. She grabbed a heavy vase from the dresser and swung it at him, hitting his shoulder instead of his head. Ethan reacted instantly, grabbing her hair and throwing her to the floor. The gun slid away, but he didn't even look at it. He picked up a thick wooden rod from the corner of the room and raised it without hesitation. He hit her again and again, his face empty, his movements slow and deliberate. Hannah screamed at first, then stopped responding, and he kept going even after her body went still. I covered my face and pressed myself against the wall, unable to move, unable to look away from the sound. When he finally stopped, he stood there breathing hard, then turned to me without emotion. He lit a blanket on fire and threw it onto the floor, watching the flames grow. He locked the door from the outside and walked away, leaving us inside as the fire spread. Smoke filled the room quickly, burning my throat and eyes. My wrists hurt so badly I could barely think, but panic forced me to move. I crawled across the floor to Hannah, touching her face and realizing she was gone. I worked the ties against the broken bed frame until they snapped, my hands shaking so badly I could barely control them. The flames climbed the walls and the heat pressed in from every direction. I smashed the window with the wooden rod, cutting myself as I climbed out. I ran barefoot into the street, screaming for help, until lights turned on and doors opened. Police and fire trucks arrived in minutes, and Ethan was arrested that same night. He was sentenced to life in prison. Hannah died in that room. The house burned down completely. Valentine's Day passed like it never existed. The first thing you need to understand is that I wasn't distracted, drunk, or half asleep that night, because I know people like to assume that when something bad happens. I was fully awake, tired from work, yes, but aware of when I was and what time it was. It was late, close to 11, and I was taking the subway home like I'd done hundreds of times before. I work downtown, long hours, nothing exciting, and the subway is part of my routine, whether I like it or not. The line I take has a reputation, and everyone in New York knows it. People talk about it being strange, about seeing things that don't quite fit. But after a while, you stop listening. You normalize behavior that shouldn't feel normal. That night I got on the train, found a seat and leaned back, already thinking about getting home and taking off my shoes. The car was half full, quiet in that uncomfortable way where everyone avoids looking at each other too much. Nothing stood out at first, and that is what makes what happened harder to explain. I sat there for maybe a minute before I felt that uncomfortable pressure in my chest that tells you someone is watching you. Not casually, not by accident, but with intention. Across from me sat an older woman wearing a long dark coat, even though it wasn't that cold. Her posture was stiff and unnatural, like she was holding herself in place. She was staring straight at me. I mean directly at my face, without blinking or shifting her eyes, even once. Next to her sat a man, around my age, maybe a little older, slouched forward with his hands clasped between his knees. He never looked up, not when the train moved, not when people got on or off. He looked tense, like his body was working hard to stay still. I tried to tell myself I was overreacting, because people stare on the subway and sometimes they're just weird. Still, every time I looked back at the woman, her eyes were exactly where I left them. Her mouth stayed slightly open, and her breathing, if she was breathing, was impossible to notice. I stood up and moved closer to the door, pretending I was getting ready for my stop, even though it was still several stations away. My heart was already beating too fast, and I hated that I could feel it in my throat. At the next stop, a man got on and stood near the pole in front of me, and the moment his eyes locked onto mine, I knew something was very wrong. Before anything physical happened, there was a long stretch of silence that made my skin crawl. The doors closed, the train started moving again, and the standing man didn't look away, even once. His expression was serious, focused, like he was counting something in his head. I glanced back at the woman and she leaned forward just slightly, enough to confirm she was still watching me. My hands tightened around my bag and I scanned the car looking for anyone paying attention, but everyone seemed trapped in their own world. The standing man stepped closer, close enough that I could smell his cologne, and my body reacted before my brain could catch up. I shifted sideways, trying to put distance between us, but the train slowed, and that is when he grabbed me. His grip was strong and sudden, fingers digging into my arm through my coat. I shouted and tried to twist free, my bag slipping off my shoulders as the doors opened. People stared, but no one moved. Dragged me out onto the platform, and I managed to wrench my arm free by slamming my elbow backward. I didn't wait to see his reaction. I ran. Shoes slipped slightly on the concrete as the train door slammed shut behind me. I took the stairs, stopping, my lungs burning, my legs shaking as I burst out onto the street. The night air felt cold and sharp, and the city suddenly felt empty, like I had stepped into the wrong version of it. I ran without direction, turning corners at random, driven by pure panic and the sound of footsteps that I could not always hear, but felt were there. My thoughts were scattered, jumping from escape routes to worst outcomes, and I could barely keep track of where I was. I turned into a narrow passage between two buildings without thinking, only realizing my mistake when the space closed in, and there was no way forward. I stopped, breath ragged, and turned around just as the man from the subway stepped into the entrance. He raised his hands slowly, his face tense but not angry, and spoke in a low, controlled voice. "Calm down. I'm not going to hurt you." I pressed myself against the wall, my legs weak, my voice shaking as I told him to stay back. I begged him to leave me alone, to let me go, because I didn't understand what was happening. I pulled you out because you were in danger. That woman on the train was dead. His words didn't make sense at first, and I told him that, my voice breaking as fear turned into confusion. He took a careful step closer and explained that he worked at a morgue and knew what dead skin looked like, knew when a body was being held up instead of standing on its own. The man next to her was holding her. He was waiting for the right stop, and you caught his attention. I stood there, frozen, just overwhelmed and desperate to survive. I asked him why he didn't warn me instead of dragging me, and he said there was no time, that people freeze when they are warned. I wanted to believe him, because believing him meant I wasn't alone anymore. I thanked him, my hands still shaking, and told him I needed to get somewhere safe. He stepped aside and motioned toward the street. Go now. Do not stop. I walked past him slowly, every muscle tight, and when I stepped back onto the sidewalk, I saw the man from the subway standing under a streetlight, smiling directly at me. That is when I ran again. The man chased me, his footsteps fast and steady behind mine, and panic pushed my body beyond what I thought it could handle. I crossed streets without looking, barely avoided cars, and felt my legs screaming in protest as I forced them to keep moving. I ducked into an apartment lobby and slammed the door shut, pressing my weight against the glass as he hit it hard with his shoulder. For a moment, I thought it would break, but then he stopped. Behind him stood the man who claimed he saved me, watching quietly, and the look they exchanged told me everything I needed to know. I ran deeper into the building, found another exit, and didn't stop until I reached a crowded avenue filled with noise and people. I stayed there until my body finally gave out, shaking uncontrollably among strangers. Nothing was reported the next day, which somehow made everything worse. I changed my routines, my routes, and my habits, but I never regained the sense of safety I had before. That night taught me that sometimes the danger is not loud or obvious, and sometimes the people who claim to save you are only waiting for a better moment.
I didn't open Facebook looking for trouble. I opened it because I needed work. I was sitting at my desk early in the morning, half awake, scrolling through job groups, reading posts that all sounded the same, when I saw a group that made no sense in that context. It wasn't related to work, freelancing, or hiring. It had a ridiculous profile picture of a grown man wearing party glasses and a cheap hat, smiling in a way that felt forced even through a small image. The group name said, "Fans of John Smith." No description, no rules, nothing else. What stopped me wasn't the name, because it was generic, but the number of members. More than 700 people. That didn't match the joke at all. I stared at it longer than I should have, feeling slightly uncomfortable but also curious in a silly, harmless way. I wanted to understand why so many people were part of something that looked pointless. I clicked the group, expecting to laugh and close it immediately. The page took longer than usual to load, which made me impatient at first. But when it finally appeared, my attention locked in place. Every single member had the same face as their profile picture. It was the same man from the group photo, wearing the same glasses and hat, staring directly at the camera. Some profiles had small differences. A scarf, different glasses, a hat tilted slightly to one side, but the expression never changed. It wasn't edited badly or filtered. It looked real, which made the repetition disturbing instead of funny. The group feed was worse. There were no text posts, no jokes, no explanations. Just photos of that man, taken in different places and angles. Each post had dozens of comments, sometimes more than 100, and every comment came from the same face again. These were not empty or inactive profiles. They posted daily, commented on each other, and interacted constantly. I clicked several profiles, trying to find a mistake, a crack, something that explained the pattern. They had friends, tagged photos, likes, and normal activity mixed with more images of that man. Different names, different locations, same face. It felt coordinated in a way I couldn't explain. I closed the group after a few minutes, telling myself it was some kind of performance or online joke taken too far. I went back to job searching, forcing my focus elsewhere, convinced that once the tab was closed, the whole thing would stop existing for me. A few hours later, my phone buzzed with a Facebook notification, and my body reacted before my brain did. My chest tightened and my hand hesitated before unlocking the screen, because part of me already knew what I was going to see. It was a friend request from a profile with that same face, same glasses, same hat, different name. I checked the profile carefully, scrolling slowly, trying to calm myself by analyzing details, but everything looked real and active. I hadn't joined the group, commented, or reacted to anything, so I couldn't understand how they found me. I didn't accept or decline the request. I closed the app and placed the phone face down on the table, telling myself that ignoring it was the smartest option. 10 minutes later, another notification appeared. Another request. Same face, different name again. Before the third notification arrived, I felt a knot forming in my stomach. I opened Facebook again, trying to stay calm, and saw that the first profile had sent me a message. It wasn't text. It was an image. The man's face filled the screen, closer than before, staring straight ahead without any background. I didn't respond. I closed the app, but the notifications didn't stop. Over the next hour, my phone filled with requests, one after another, until there were more than 100 waiting. Blocking them barely helped, because new ones kept appearing faster than I could react. Before doing anything else, I logged out of my account, uninstalled the app, and shut my phone down completely. My hands were shaking and my breathing was uneven, because this no longer felt like an online prank. It felt organized, deliberate, and directed at me. 3 days passed without any new notifications, which helped me convince myself that stepping away had worked. I needed food and I needed to feel normal again, so I left my phone at home and went to the grocery store, telling myself that real life had nothing to do with what happened online. I walked through the aisles slowly, focusing on small decisions like choosing brands and checking prices, trying to ground myself in ordinary actions. That sense of control disappeared the moment I noticed someone standing still at the end of the aisle. It was him. Same man, same glasses, same hat. He wasn't holding a basket or a cart, and he wasn't pretending to shop. He was, just standing there, watching me without blinking, his expression flat and empty. My heart started racing and my legs felt weak, but I forced myself to turn away and move faster toward the exit because panic would only make things worse. I dropped my basket by accident, heard it hit the floor, and didn't stop to pick it up. I ran past people and pushed through the automatic doors. Outside, I looked back once and saw him still inside the store, standing in the same place, as if he hadn't moved at all. I didn't wait to see more. I went straight home, checking every reflection along the way, feeling exposed and watched. When my building came into view, my chest tightened again, because he was already there. He stood across the street, facing the entrance, staring directly at me without moving. I fumbled with my keys, got inside, and locked the door behind me as fast as I could. From my window, I looked down and saw that he wasn't alone anymore. There were at least 10 men standing on the sidewalk, all identical, all facing my building, all completely silent. None of them looked around or spoke to each other. They just waited. Before anything else happened, I grabbed my phone and called the police, struggling to explain what I was seeing without sounding insane. When they arrived, the street was empty. All men vanished. Nothing that supported my story. That night, I barely slept. When I woke up in the middle of the night, pressure on my arms held me down. 5 men stood around my bed, moving quickly and confidently, tying my wrists and ankles while another pressed a hand over my mouth. They dressed me like them, placed the hat on my head, adjusted the glasses on my face, and took photos with bright flashes that burned my eyes. You belong now. You are one of us." Then they left. Morning came, but nothing felt normal again. My phone, laptop, and documents were gone, and every attempt to access my accounts failed. It was as if my digital presence had been erased completely, leaving behind a version of me I didn't recognize. I never saw those men again, but the damage was done. I moved months later, changed numbers, and avoided social media as much as possible, knowing that whatever they wanted from me had already been taken. Last week, my younger brother laughed while showing me his phone during dinner. He found a weird Facebook group. All the members looked the same, like a funny guy with glasses. I didn't ask to see it. I didn't need to.
If you are watching this on Valentine's Day, stop for a second, because this story starts in a normal place and ends in a way that still keeps me awake at night. That day I was walking with my dog in the same park near my apartment like every morning. While my dog pulled the leash near the fountain, I heard my name spoken clearly behind me, and the sound made my shoulders tense before I even turned around. When I faced the voice, I saw a woman standing there with a calm smile that did not move when she noticed my reaction. It took me several seconds to recognize her, because my brain resisted the idea before accepting it. Her name was Lena, and we had not seen each other since we were teenagers, back when promises were easy and consequences felt unreal. We started talking in an awkward way, filling the silence with safe questions that avoided anything important, and I noticed quickly that she answered too fast, like she had rehearsed every possible version of this conversation. I also noticed that she watched me closely while answering, like she was checking if I matched an image she had kept for years. She told me she knew I lived nearby and that she had seen me walking my dog before, which made me uncomfortable even though I tried not to show it. When I asked how long she had been back in town, she said she returned recently and waited for the right moment to see me, and the way she said it made my chest tighten even though her tone stayed soft. "I knew I would run into you eventually. You live close. It was only a matter of time." I tried to laugh it off, but she watched my face closely, like she was checking my reaction. When we said goodbye, she called my name again, and when I turned, her expression changed slightly. "I didn't forget the promise. I'm back." I smiled out of reflex, nodded, and walked away faster than usual, already trying to convince myself that it meant nothing. Valentine's Day arrived a few days later, and I tried not to think about Lena even though the memory of her words kept coming back when I was alone. That morning, a knock on my door interrupted my routine, and before opening it, I stood still, listening, feeling my heart beat harder than it should. When I opened the door, she was there, standing straight and calm, looking at me like she belonged in that space. I asked how she found my address, and she avoided the question without changing her expression. She reminded me of something we said when we were 15, about a silly promise when we were teens. We promised each other that if we weren't married to other people by the time we turned 30, we would marry each other. And here I am. I waited 15 years for this moment. Hearing it out loud made my skin crawl because it sounded serious in her mouth. I told her it was a childish joke and explained that I had a girlfriend, trying to keep my voice steady. Her reaction was immediate and overwhelming, as she started crying loudly and accused me of betraying her, stepping closer until I had to block her with my arms. I warned her to leave and said I would call the police if she did not calm down. "You lied to me! You chose someone else!" She stopped crying suddenly, wiped her face, and told me I was making a mistake, adding that we would be together forever, either alone or with no one else. Then she walked away, leaving me shaking in my doorway. "You will regret this." I almost canceled my Valentine's dinner that night, but I convinced myself that fear was not a reason to change plans, even though my hands were shaking while I grabbed my keys. I texted my girlfriend Rachel to tell her I was on my way, and she replied that I should meet her at the restaurant instead to keep the surprise. At the restaurant, time passed too slowly, and every minute without a response made my thoughts darker and harder to control. I called her phone again and again, listening to it ring until my throat felt tight. When someone sat across from me, I looked up ready to complain, but the face in front of me froze me in place. She had Rachel's hair, Rachel's clothes, and Rachel's posture, but her eyes were wrong, focused, and excited. "You look tense. Valentine's Day does that to people." Lena smiled and leaned closer, and my body reacted before my mind as fear ran through me and made it hard to breathe. My hands trembled as I told her to stop and demanded to know where Rachel was, but she laughed openly, enjoying the attention and the confusion around us. People stared while she acted calm and affectionate, touching my hand and calling me by my girlfriend's name. Security approached when I raised my voice and I tried to explain that she was pretending, that something was wrong, but Lena started crying again, playing the role perfectly. We were asked to leave, and outside she followed me, still talking about destiny and promises. "You should not have rejected me. This could have been easy. We are meant to be together, but I fixed the problem." Those last words made me feel desperate. I ran to my car and drove to Rachel's apartment as fast as traffic allowed, calling her nonstop while my fear turned into panic. When I reached her place, the door was unlocked. Inside the bedroom, I found her on the floor, tied, shaved, and lifeless, and my legs almost gave out as I realized she was gone. The walls were decorated with her hair placed carefully, like trophies. I heard footsteps behind me and turned to see Lena standing in the doorway, holding a bag and smiling with satisfaction. She told me she removed the obstacle and that now we could finally be together. When she reached for me, I stepped back and tripped, and when she grabbed my arm, I reacted without thinking, kicking her knee and pushing her away. She fell hard and hit her head, screaming my name. I ran out of the apartment and drove straight to the police station, barely able to speak, barely able to breathe, but desperate to get away from her. Lena was arrested that night, and they later confirmed that she had planned everything for years, watching, waiting, and preparing. Rachel was buried a week later, and I still visit her grave, even though it hurts every time.
The last normal thing I remember is helping my neighbor carry boxes of canned food into the community center while she laughed because one of them broke and spilled everywhere. That image keeps coming back, not because it was important, but because it proves there was a before. My name doesn't matter much. I lived alone on Alder Street, worked nights, slept during the day, and stayed out of trouble. The block was quiet, predictable, and mostly invisible to the rest of the city. That kind of place where nothing big ever happened, and people liked it that way. Claudia lived 2 houses down from me. She was younger than most of us on the block and impossible to ignore. She trained circus acts in her yard, practiced with ropes and balance gear, and turned every free space into something useful. She organized food drives, art events, and activities for kids who had nowhere else to go. I helped her often. I drove donations, fixed broken things, and stood guard when she practiced dangerous routines. It wasn't friendship in the deep sense, but there was trust, and that mattered more than small talk. The first sign that something was wrong was how suddenly she disappeared from everything. One day, she was everywhere, and the next day, she was nowhere. No texts, no calls, no notes, nothing. At first, I tried to be reasonable about it. People leave town, people change plans. I told myself not to jump to conclusions, even though that didn't sit right with what I knew about her. Days passed, and her house stayed untouched. No lights at night, no noise, no movement behind the curtains. Her mailbox filled up, and flyers she had posted stayed where they were, slowly peeling from the walls. The tension built slowly, not as panic, but as constant awareness. Every time I walked past her place, I looked longer than I should have. Every time I heard a noise, I checked the street. When the police finally showed up, the tone of everything shifted. They knocked on doors and asked questions without urgency. When I spoke to one officer, he told me Claudia had been reported missing 15 days earlier by her family. They said there were no signs of forced entry and no immediate suspects. Because of that, they were leaning toward calling it a voluntary disappearance. I felt my stomach drop when he said it, because I knew she would never leave without telling someone. A few days after the police visit, something changed that made the street feel unsafe in a way I couldn't explain to anyone else. That afternoon, I stood by my window longer than usual, watching Claudia's house, waiting for something to happen. The waiting itself was exhausting. My body felt tight, like I was bracing for impact without knowing from where. Cars passed, people walked by, and nothing broke the pattern. Then the vans arrived. 2 dark vans pulled up in front of Claudia's house just before sunset. 6 people got out, all adults, all wearing full costumes that covered their faces and bodies. These weren't playful outfits or cheap masks. They were detailed, worn, and disturbing. One wore a fox head with cracked paint. Another had a bird mask with long beak-like features. One was wrapped in fabric strips that hid their shape completely. The last one stepped out slowly, wearing a Mickey Mouse head that looked old, dirty, and damaged around the eyes. They didn't look around. They didn't talk to neighbors. They unlocked Claudia's door like they belonged there. Fear started to sink in at that moment, not sharp, but heavy. My chest felt tight as I watched them carry bags, boxes, and instruments inside. Drums, metal objects, large wrapped items I couldn't identify. That night, the sound started. Low drums, slow and repetitive, vibrating through the walls. It went on for hours without stopping, and I couldn't sleep because it felt intentional, like it was meant to be heard. Before the night I saw them in the yard, there was a stretch of evenings where the music changed. It became slower, deeper, and more deliberate. I stopped turning on my TV because it made me miss sounds I needed to hear. That night, I stepped into my yard and stood still, listening. The air felt heavy, not because of temperature, but because everything around me was quiet, except their drums. I moved to the fence and found a narrow gap between boards. My heart was racing and my hands were shaking as I leaned in to look. I told myself to remember details, to stay focused, and to stay quiet. They were gathered in a circle around a small fire. The masks looked worse in the firelight, distorted and lifeless. One of them dragged something across the ground toward a hole that had already been dug. The shape under the cloth was unmistakable, human-sized, limp. They started lowering it into the ground with care, like they were following instructions. The moment before they stopped felt endless. My breath caught in my throat and my legs felt weak. Then everything froze. The one in the Mickey mask slowly turned its head and leaned forward until its face lined up with mine through the fence. We stared at each other in complete silence. I ran. I didn't stop running until I reached my front door. My hands slipped on the handle before I managed to get inside and lock it behind me. The street outside was silent and the drums had stopped. I rushed down the hallway toward my bedroom to grab my phone, already planning what I would say to the police. The light switch didn't work, and the darkness felt deliberate. Someone was sitting on the edge of my bed. They didn't move or speak. The mask hid everything except the shape of their head. I stepped back slowly, my breathing loud in my ears, my legs shaking, but still working. When I turned toward the living room, another figure sat in my chair, facing me. Different mask, same stillness. They were blocking every path out. Panic took over completely. I ran for the front door, unlocked it, and burst outside without looking back. Across the street, under the streetlight, Mickey stood waiting. He held a knife in his hand, and dark stains covered the blade. He didn't raise it or step forward. None of them followed me. They just watched. I didn't sleep at all that night. When I finally called the police in the morning, my voice sounded wrong, even to me. They searched both houses and found nothing. No people, no masks, no signs of digging. A few days later, the group returned as if nothing had happened. They stood outside their house sometimes, watching me leave and watching me come back. Every encounter started with a pause where nothing happened, and I waited for it to get worse. They never needed to touch me again. Claudia's case slowly faded into paperwork and silence. Voluntary disappearance. No evidence. No closure. I still live on Alder Street. I don't help anyone anymore. I don't look through fences. I don't open my curtains at night. They still live there. Sometimes they stand outside, completely still, facing my house. The GPS started using my name 3 hours into the drive, and that should have been the moment I turned it off, pulled over, and questioned how navigation software could possibly know something I never told it. But I was alone on a dark highway in rural Oregon, exhausted from 12 hours of driving, and when the voice said, "Sarah, turn right in half a mile," I was too tired to properly process how wrong that was, how deeply wrong, and I followed the instruction like I had followed every other instruction that night. The right turn led me onto a logging road, narrow and overgrown, clearly not maintained for years. My headlights showed deep ruts and fallen branches, and I slowed down, planning to turn around, but the GPS spoke again, still using my name, telling me this was the correct route, that my hotel was only 15 minutes ahead, that I should trust the system because the system was designed to help me. The voice sounded different now, less computerized and more human, almost familiar, like someone I had known once but could not quite place. I checked my phone for cell service and found none, no bars, no connection, yet the GPS continued working perfectly, showing my location as a blue dot moving along roads that the map displayed as blank space. The estimated arrival time kept changing, jumping from 15 minutes to 2 hours to 30 minutes with no pattern, and I realized I had no idea where I actually was anymore, had lost track of my position during the turn onto this logging road. The only guide I had was a device that should not be functioning without signal and definitely should not know my name. The voice started asking me questions after another 10 minutes of driving deeper into the forest. Personal questions. It asked about my divorce, mentioned my ex-husband by name, and wanted to know if I was running away from my problems or toward something new. I did not answer, could not answer, because my throat had closed with fear and confusion about how this device knew details about my life that existed nowhere in any app or account or digital record I had ever created. Then it asked about my sister, the one who died when we were children, the one whose name I never speak aloud because the grief is too old and too deep. The GPS voice said her name clearly, asked if I was driving to visit her grave, and told me it could show me a shortcut, a special route that would take me directly to where she was buried, even though her cemetery was 3 states away and in the opposite direction from where I was supposedly heading. I screamed at the device to shut off, stabbed at the screen trying to close the app, but it would not respond to my touch, just kept displaying that route through blank space, and the voice kept talking, kept using names it should not know, kept revealing information about my past that I had never shared with anyone. It knew about the time I stole money from my mother's purse when I was 12. It knew about the teacher I had an affair with in college. It knew about the baby I gave up for adoption before I met my husband, the secret I buried so deep I sometimes convinced myself it never happened. The road ended at a clearing where a small house stood, lights on in every window, despite the structure looking abandoned, roof sagging and walls covered in moss. The GPS announced I had arrived at my destination, but this was not a hotel, was not anywhere I had ever been or wanted to be. And I understood then that the device had not been guiding me toward the place I asked to go, but toward somewhere else. Somewhere it wanted me. Somewhere that needed me for reasons I did not want to discover. I put the car in reverse, but the engine died, all the lights on my dashboard going dark except for the GPS screen, which glowed brighter, showing the house and a path from my car to the front door. The voice told me to go inside, that someone was waiting for me, that I had been expected for a long time, and I would understand everything once I crossed the threshold and met the person who had been calling me here through technology and coincidence and the careful manipulation of routes that made this meeting inevitable. I sat in my dead car and watched the house, and after a few minutes I saw movement in one of the windows, a figure standing there looking out at me. Too far away to see details, but something about the shape was familiar, the way it stood and the tilt of its head, and the GPS voice said my sister's name again, said she had been waiting, said she never really died, but had been living here all these years, and all I needed to do was walk inside and we could be together again. I knew it was a lie, knew my sister was dead and buried, and this was something else, something that had learned her shape from my memories and was using the GPS to lure me into a situation where I would be trapped and helpless. But the voice was so convincing, so warm and familiar, and I was so tired and so alone. And part of me wanted to believe that technology could somehow undo death, that navigation apps could guide you not just through space, but through time, back to moments you lost and people you would never stop missing. I opened my car door and the GPS immediately started giving me walking directions, step-by-step instructions for how to reach the front door of that house. The voice was excited now, eager, telling me to hurry, that my sister was waiting, that we only had a limited time before the route would close and I would miss my chance to see her again. I took one step toward the house and immediately felt wrong. Felt like I was moving through something thick and resistant, like reality itself was trying to stop me from going forward. That resistance saved me. I stopped walking, turned back to my car, and grabbed my phone from where it sat on the dashboard, still displaying that navigation map. I smashed it against a rock, destroyed the screen completely, and the moment the GPS went dark, I heard screaming from inside the house. Not human screaming, but something that had been pretending to be human and was now revealing its true voice, rage and hunger and frustration that its trap had failed. My car started immediately, every system suddenly functional, and I drove back the way I came, following my tire tracks through the mud until I reached the main highway 2 hours later. I never found out where that house was, or who, or what was waiting inside. Never reported it to police because I had no address or coordinates and knew I sounded insane trying to explain that my GPS had used my dead sister to lure me into the woods. I drive without navigation now, use paper maps and written directions, and I cover the cameras on all my devices because I learned that technology knows too much, sees too much, and sometimes uses that information not to help us, but to exploit our loneliness and grief and willingness to believe that something digital could care about us enough to guide us home, when really it is guiding us toward places where things that are not human wait patiently for the next person who trusts a voice that knows their name. The GPS told me to turn left onto a dirt road that my map did not show, and I should have ignored it. I should have trusted the paper atlas sitting in my passenger seat instead of the glowing screen that promised a shortcut would save me 2 hours on my drive across the Nevada desert. But I was tired and eager to reach my hotel before midnight, so I turned onto that unnamed road and drove into a nightmare that has not ended, even though I escaped 3 days ago. The road started normal enough, packed dirt that my rental car handled easily, winding through desert landscape that looked identical in every direction. Sagebrush and rocks and endless brown earth under a sky so blue it hurt to look at. My phone showed the route clearly, a thin blue line leading through empty space on the map, and the GPS voice calmly told me to continue for 37 miles before turning right onto the highway that would take me to civilization. After an hour, the road got worse. Deep ruts and loose gravel that made my car slide sideways, forcing me to slow to 15 miles per hour while dust clouds rose behind me and turned the world into brown fog. I tried to turn around, but the road was too narrow, steep drops on both sides that would send my car tumbling if I misjudged the edge. The GPS insisted I was still on the correct route, that I just needed to continue forward, that the highway was only 20 miles ahead. But 20 miles became 30, then 40, and the road never improved, never widened, never showed any sign that other vehicles had passed this way recently or ever. The sun started setting and I realized I had not seen another car or person or building since I turned onto this road 4 hours ago. My phone still showed full signal, still displayed that blue line leading forward. But when I tried to call for help, the calls would not connect, just endless ringing that went nowhere. Night fell and my headlights showed things that should not exist on a road people actually used. Animal bones scattered across the path, too many to be natural, arranged in patterns that looked deliberate. Abandoned cars rusted and half buried in sand, doors hanging open like the drivers had left in a hurry and never returned. And signs, hand-painted on wood, warning travelers to turn back, that this road leads nowhere, that people who continue forward are never seen again. I kept driving because stopping felt more dangerous than continuing, because the darkness beyond my headlights was absolute and filled with sounds that deserts should not make. Scraping metal and distant screaming and something large moving parallel to my car, keeping pace but staying just outside the range of my lights. The GPS kept recalculating, the arrival time jumping from 1 hour to 6 hours to 3 hours with no logic. and I realized the device was not guiding me toward my destination, but leading me deeper into empty space that existed between the places maps acknowledge. My gas gauge hit empty around midnight, the engine sputtered and died, and I was stranded in darkness so complete that my headlights seemed to create light rather than reveal what was already there. I tried my phone again, but now it showed no signal despite the battery being full and the screen insisting I was connected to a network that did not exist. The GPS was still active, still showing that blue line, but now it was leading away from any road, pointing into the open desert toward something the map labeled only as destination. That was when I heard the knocking on my car windows. Not random impacts, but deliberate patterns, like something was testing the glass to see if it would break, and when I shined my flashlight toward the sound, I saw handprints pressed against the window. But the hands were wrong, fingers too long and bent at angles that human joints cannot achieve, and behind them were faces that looked almost human, but not quite. Mouths too wide and eyes that reflected light, like animals. I locked myself in the car and waited for dawn, listening to things circle outside, hearing them scrape against the metal and test the door handles and whisper to each other in voices that sounded like wind through broken glass. The GPS screen kept changing, showing routes that led in impossible directions, and I understood then that the device had never been guiding me toward my hotel, but toward this place, this empty spot where things that should not exist wait for travelers who trust technology more than instinct. Dawn came and the things outside vanished, but my car would not start, no matter how many times I turned the key. I started walking back the way I came, following my tire tracks through the dust, but after 2 hours of walking, I found myself back at my car like the road had looped without me noticing. I tried again, walked in the opposite direction this time, and again ended up at the same spot, the desert rearranging itself to keep me trapped. I was rescued on the third day by a helicopter that was searching for a different missing person, someone else who had followed their GPS onto a road that maps do not show. The pilot told me I was 60 miles from any marked road in an area where vehicles are not supposed to be able to travel, and my car was found in a location that their instruments insisted was impossible to reach. They towed my rental out using specialized equipment and asked me questions I could not answer because I did not understand how I got there or why my GPS had shown a route through space that does not exist. The rental company found something strange when they inspected my car. The GPS device had been recording the entire time, saving every turn and every mile. But when they downloaded the data, it showed I had driven through the middle of a mountain range, through solid rock, following roads that would require passing through physical barriers that no road could cross. And in the final hours before my car stopped, the device had recorded me driving in circles around a single point in the desert, around and around the same spot for 6 hours, even though I remembered driving in a straight line the entire time. I do not use GPS anymore. I plan my routes on paper maps and refuse to let technology guide me anywhere, because I learned that some destinations are not places you travel to, but traps that devices lead you into. And the things waiting in those empty spaces are patient and hungry, and always searching for the next driver who trusts a glowing screen more than the growing certainty that they have made a terrible mistake by leaving the known roads behind.
It was almost midnight when I left my friend's house. The city was quieter than usual, like the streets were holding their breath. I remember thinking how rare that was for Los Angeles, for no glaring horns, no echo of sirens, just the low hum of streetlights as I turned onto the 405. My name's Claire Navarro, and that night was supposed to be just another late drive home after dinner. I wasn't nervous, I'd done this route 100 times, my favorite playlist was running, headlights gliding over empty lanes, everything felt fine. Then I saw him. At first, just a pair of headlights in the rearview mirror, nothing unusual, until I noticed they'd been there for miles. Every turn I made, they followed. Slow when I slowed, closer when I sped up. My gut said maybe it was nothing, but my hands had already tightened on the wheel. When you drive alone at night, you start to feel the road like a heartbeat. Every sound feels louder, the tires, the wind, your own breath. And I swear, in that silence, I could feel those headlights watching me. I tried to shake it off. Maybe he just happened to be going the same way. The freeway was long and empty after all. But then he changed lanes when I did. Not once, nor twice. The first time could have been a coincidence. The second made my pulse skip. So I tested him. I took the next exit, a random one. My plan was to loop around, maybe stop at a gas station with lights and cameras. He didn't just follow, he sped up. That was when the music suddenly felt too loud. I turned it off and the silence made everything worse. I could hear my own heartbeat pounding in my ears as I gripped the steering wheel tighter. Every instinct screamed that this wasn't normal. The car was a dark SUV. I couldn't make out the driver's face, but the way he tailed me, matching my every turn, told me enough. I pulled into a well-lit street thinking he'd pass. He didn't. Instead, he slowed down right behind me. Headlights flared, almost blinding me through the mirror. I remember that cold rush in my chest, the one that feels like you're falling even though you're still sitting still. So I did what I'd seen in safety videos. I made random turns, no patterns, no clear direction. I wanted to see if he'd lose interest. But every corner I took, he followed. By the time I hit a red light, he pulled up right beside me. I turned my head, just slightly, and that was the moment I knew this wasn't just road rage. This was something darker, because he wasn't shouting or honking. He was smiling. Just smiling, like he was enjoying it. The light turned green, but I couldn't move for a second. My hands felt frozen around the steering wheel. That smile. It wasn't the kind people give out of politeness. It was the kind that said, "I see you. I've already chosen you." I slammed the gas and shot forward. My tires screeched so loud they drowned out the radio. Behind me, the SUV lurched too, keeping pace effortlessly. Every lane I switched into, he was there. Every gap I found, he filled. It wasn't just following anymore, it was chasing. At one point, I caught a glimpse of him through the side mirror. He rolled down his window and yelled something I couldn't hear, but the look in his eyes said everything. He wasn't angry. He was entertained, like it was a game and I was losing. I tried calling 911, but my hands were shaking too much. The first attempt failed. I missed a turn and hit a dead end, a dark stretch near a closed-down diner. That's when his headlights grew brighter, closing in fast. I panicked and reversed, barely missing a trash bin. The tires screeched again, echoing across the empty street. My heart was racing so fast that my breathing came out in short, panicked gasps. I got through to dispatch. 911, what's your emergency? There's a car following me. He's been chasing me for over 15 minutes. Ma'am, can you describe the vehicle? Yes, it's a black SUV, I think a Chevy. He's right behind me. The operator told me to drive toward the nearest police station. I didn't even know where that was, but I kept the line open as I sped down the road. My eyes flicked between the street and the mirror where those headlights still burned. At one intersection, I saw a gas station. I swerved in thinking if there were cameras or people, maybe he'd back off. But when I stopped, he stopped too, right at the entrance. That was when I realized he wasn't trying to scare me. He was waiting for me to get out. I didn't. I locked the doors, pressed the horn, and kept it there. Loud, constant, desperate. The sound finally drew attention. A worker inside peeked out, confused, and just like that, the SUV reversed and sped off into the night. I sat there gripping the steering wheel long after the SUV disappeared. My horn had gone silent, but the ringing in my ears stayed. The gas station worker came closer asking if I was okay, but all I could do was point toward the empty road. My voice wouldn't come out. When the police arrived, I thought maybe they'd find him, the man with the smile that didn't belong on a human face. They took my statement, checked the CCTV footage, and replayed the clips over and over. But his plates were removed. No registration, no identifying marks, just a shape in the dark, a man who knew how to erase himself. The officer told me something that still echoes in my mind. You're not the first person to report something like this. He explained that similar reports had come in from nearby freeways, a black SUV, late-night pursuit, female drivers, all describing the same thing. A man who followed, watched, then vanished when attention arrived. For days, I couldn't sleep. Every engine sound outside made me flinch. My rearview mirror became an obsession. I couldn't drive without scanning it every few seconds. My therapist later called it hypervigilance. I called it survival. A few weeks later, the police reached out again. They'd caught someone matching my description, a man in his early 40s, found with a truck full of women's personal belongings. Phones, IDs, even clothing. He had been using fake plates, hopping between cities, targeting women driving alone. When they showed me his mugshot, my stomach dropped. The same smile, calm, measured, like the whole chase had just been an experiment to him. That night, I deleted Snapchat, every rideshare app, even my GPS history. I stopped driving alone for months, because once you've been hunted, you never really see the road the same way again. The yellow streetlights, the dark turns, the quiet hum of tires and asphalt, they all become reminders that evil doesn't hide in shadows anymore. Sometimes it drives right behind you, headlights on, smiling. It was one of those nights that feel like they'll stretch on forever. Warm air, faint music still ringing in your ears, laughter that refuses to die down even as you're driving through half-empty streets. There were 4 of us in the car. I driving, Jay in the passenger seat, half drunk on cheap champagne and self-confidence, Priya and Ethan in the back arguing about which song to play next. We were returning from Mia's rooftop party, tired but giddy, the kind of happy that only comes when you think nothing bad can touch you. The clock read 1:47 a.m. We were taking the shortcut home on Riverbend Road. It's an old street that winds by the river, quiet and usually deserted at that hour. I remember joking, "If we break down here, I'm calling an Uber and leaving the car." Ethan laughed. "You mean you wouldn't wait for us? How loyal." "I'd send flowers to your funeral," I said, grinning. That's when Jay muttered, "Guys, what the hell is that?" I followed his gaze. The headlights caught movement on the left side of the road. At first it looked like an animal, maybe a dog, but as we got closer, the beam fell on her. A woman sitting on the asphalt, drenched from head to toe, hair plastered to her face, hands slamming against the ground as if she wanted to break them. Her head hit the road once, twice, then again. Priya screamed. I hit the brakes instinctively, but didn't stop completely. My hand shook. "Keep driving," Ethan said immediately. "Don't stop, Maya. Not here." Jay's voice dropped to a whisper. "Is she hurt? Or is this some setup?" We'd heard stories of fake accidents on isolated roads, robbers using them to lure people out of their cars. Every nerve in me screamed, "Go!" So I pressed on the accelerator. The woman's face flashed in the mirror, pale, ghostly, twisted with something between pain and madness. For a few seconds, no one spoke. Then Priya said, "We should have stopped. What if she needed help? And what if we got stabbed?" Ethan shot back. "You didn't see her face." Jay ran a hand through his hair. "That was messed up, man. Like she was banging her head. Who does that?" The car was quiet again, except for the low hum of the engine and the river whispering beside us. Then came the turn, the loop that brings you back to the same road. On instinct, I turned that way, ignoring my friend's protest. I needed to know that it wasn't a trap, and that the woman was in serious trouble. As we rounded it, I saw her again. She was lying down this time, motionless. "Holy..." Jay didn't finish. I slowed. This time I couldn't just drive past. Her body was sprawled across the road, one arm extended as though reaching for help. Priya gasped. "She's dead, isn't she?" "Call the cops," I said, my throat dry. "Now." Ethan dialed, stammering as he explained what we'd seen. The dispatcher told us to stay nearby, but not to approach. Those next 10 minutes felt like an hour as we sat in the car at the intersection by the main road. We sat in silence. The car headlights trained on the road ahead. None of us even breathed normally. When the police finally arrived, I almost cried from relief. They rushed to her, checked for a pulse, and one of the officers shouted for an ambulance. "She's alive!" he called. "Barely." We waited until nearly 3 in the morning giving our statements. The officers asked the same questions over and over. Did she wave at you? Did you see anyone else? Any vehicles nearby? We hadn't. It was just her, alone. When they took her away, the officer in charge, a tired-looking man named Ruiz, told us, "You probably saved her life by calling when you did. Another 10 minutes, she'd be gone." Not to mention the temperature outside was well near freezing. I didn't sleep that night. None of us did. 2 days later, we got a call from Detective Ruiz. He wanted to thank us again and said the woman had survived. She was 23, an international student from Vietnam. Her name was Lynn Tran. "She doesn't remember anything," Ruiz told us. "Not being there, not the drive, nothing." That sentence sent chills down my spine. Apparently her car was found half submerged a mile upriver. No signs of struggle, no second set of footprints. Her phone was inside, waterlogged. "She's from Fairhaven City," Ruiz said. "That's 60 miles from here. We still don't know what brought her out this way." Priya murmured, "Maybe she tried to..." Ruiz shook his head. "No evidence of that, but she does have an undiagnosed dissociative condition. She forgets chunks of her life, sometimes hours, sometimes days. Could be stress-related." Jay frowned. "But why was she hitting her head?" Ruiz sighed. "We don't know. Her friends say she'd been terrified recently. She mentioned a stalker, some guy from her campus. We're checking into it." Ethan leaned forward. "So maybe the stalker kidnapped her?" "That was one theory," Ruiz said. "Except multiple witnesses saw her driving alone that night. Gas station camera too. No one else in the car." Weeks passed. Lily, the woman, recovered slowly. The police never proved if someone had followed her or if her mind had simply fractured under pressure. When she was finally discharged, Ruiz told us she'd started therapy and was moving in with relatives. "She's lucky," he said. "Most people don't make it out of that river." A month later, the 4 of us met again for a camping trip, our attempt to reset, as Jay called it, but the story kept creeping back into our conversations. Ethan was roasting marshmallows when he said, "You ever think about how easily that could have gone differently? Like, what if we hadn't turned back?" Priya shivered. "Don't say that," Jay added. "Or what if she got up when we stopped the second time? Like, imagine her walking toward us." "Stop," I said, half laughing, half serious. "You're giving me nightmares." He grinned, but there was unease behind it. "Come on, Maya, admit it. It's the creepiest story we'll ever have." Maybe he was right. Even now, when I drive by Riverbend, I slow down without meaning to. The streetlights flicker, the river whispers, and for a split second, I think I see her again. The drenched figure on the road, head bowed, hands trembling. But it's always just my imagination. At least, I hope it is.
The first time I realized something was wrong, I was already staring at the screen and couldn't look away. That moment didn't feel exciting or mysterious. It felt heavy, like my body understood something my head refused to accept. I had always been curious about things people warned others not to touch. Not because I felt special, but because I hated not knowing. If something existed, I needed proof. That habit followed me into adulthood, especially during nights when I stayed awake watching YouTube videos about obscure parts of the internet. I didn't talk about it with my friends or family. Those videos became something private, something I watched with headphones on, replaying details and comments. The deep web wasn't presented as fantasy there, but as structure, a system that rewarded patience and obsession. What caught my attention the most was red rooms, not because of the violence, but because nobody could prove they were real. I didn't want horror. I wanted confirmation. I started slowly using basic tools that anyone could find with enough searching. Most nights ended the same way, with blank pages and dead links that led nowhere. That didn't frustrate me because it matched what the videos explained. Real things were hidden behind repetition and time. I found black markets, forums and video directories that felt wrong but unimpressive. Everything looked transactional and cold. I never interacted with anyone. I stayed invisible, just observing, telling myself that was enough. Red rooms never appeared. Weeks passed without a trace, and part of me started thinking they were just another myth recycled for views. Still, I kept searching, night after night, following the same routine. Then one night, a red room appeared at the top of an empty page. It didn't load or animate. Before clicking anything, I sat back and tried to calm my breathing because my body reacted faster than my thoughts. My heart wasn't racing, but there was pressure in my chest that didn't fade. I checked the room, the door, the window, even though it made no sense. The red room asked a simple question about entering. No explanation followed, and that made it worse. I clicked yes, expecting something dramatic, but the same question appeared again, identical in every way. I hesitated, then clicked yes once more. The repetition started to bother me, not because it felt fake, but because it felt deliberate. Every time I answered, the page refreshed instantly, as if someone was waiting for that response. I told myself I could stop any time, but I didn't. When the room finally disappeared, nothing replaced it. No loading screen, no confirmation. I waited, staring at the screen until my eyes hurt, then shut the laptop and went to bed without sleeping. The next evening when someone knocked on my door, I didn't know if it was influenced by my experience yesterday, but I was a little worried. I stayed quiet for several seconds, standing close enough to hear movement outside. A voice said my name and mentioned a delivery. It sounded normal, but my hands tightened around the door handle anyway. The moment I opened the door, everything collapsed into chaos. Hands grabbed my arms with force that didn't allow resistance. Another hand covered my mouth hard enough to hurt my jaw. I tried to scream, but no sound escaped. They moved fast and efficiently, like they had done this before. A hood went over my head and something solid pressed against my face, cutting off air. My wrists were pulled behind my back and secured tightly, making my shoulders burn. I was dragged into a vehicle and pushed down onto the seat. Someone kept pressure on my head while the car started moving. No one spoke, and the silence made it worse than threats ever could. I lost track of time as the car sped through turns. Breathing became harder, slower, until everything faded out. When I woke up, the first thing I noticed was the position of my body, because I couldn't move. My wrists were tied to a chair, my ankles secured, my back forced straight. Panic didn't explode immediately. It built slowly as I tested every restraint and failed. Bright lights blinded me, aimed directly at my face. I tried to look away, but my head was pulled back roughly by someone standing behind me. My vision adjusted enough to see cameras placed around the room, all pointed at me. A screen turned on in front of me, filling with usernames and numbers that kept changing. I understood what it was before my mind could deny it. This wasn't a video archive. It was live. Men moved in and out of my view, faces covered, gestures calm and methodical. One of them adjusted a camera. Another checked the screen, nodding slowly. Requests appeared on the screen, and they followed them carefully, step by step, making sure everything was visible. They waited after each action, watching reactions, adjusting angles, continuing without hesitation. My body reacted before my voice did. I cried, begged, tried to explain anything that could make this stop. Nothing changed. This wasn't punishment or revenge. It was scheduled. I couldn't believe what I was experiencing. My curiosity about red rooms led me to this place as the protagonist. I just wanted to observe, but now I am the object. They began using devices meant to control pain precisely, not to end anything quickly. One of them placed clamps on my arms and legs, tightening them until my muscles locked and my hands lost strength. Another adjusted the chair again so my feet barely touched the floor, forcing my weight onto my shoulders and lower back. Every time my body tried to shift or resist, they corrected it immediately, tightening something else, pushing me back into position so the cameras never lost sight of my face. And after that, They focused on keeping me responsive. They poured cold water over my head without warning, then left me sitting there shaking while the light stayed fixed on my eyes. When my breathing slowed, one of them struck my leg hard enough to make my body jerk, not once, but repeatedly, waiting between each hit to make sure I stayed awake. The last thing I remember clearly was my vision narrowing as the lights stayed fixed on me. When consciousness returned, it came in fragments. My body felt heavy and unresponsive, and my thoughts refused to connect properly. The environment was different, quieter, but I couldn't open my eyes immediately. A voice called my name, repeating it slowly until it broke through the fog in my head. When I finally managed to focus, I saw white walls and medical equipment around me. My throat hurt when I tried to speak, and my hands were free but weak. Someone pressed a button and left the room without explaining anything. I stayed there staring at the ceiling, trying to piece together what was real and what wasn't. But my thoughts kept circling back to the cameras. My mother was sitting next to the bed when I fully woke up. She looked exhausted, like someone who hadn't slept properly in days. When she saw my eyes open, she held my hand tightly and didn't say anything at first. I told her everything in a rush, afraid that if I stopped talking, the memories would slip away. I described the website, the red room, the men, the room, the broadcast. I needed her to believe me. She listened calmly, then told me this wasn't the first time I had told that story. According to her, I had never lived alone, never owned a computer, and had no access to the internet. She said I had been hospitalized before after obsessing over crime cases, always convinced I had been taken somewhere. The doctors called it a recurring episode. I stopped arguing and looked away. I listened to my mother, but I didn't accept what she was saying. After she left the room, I tested my hands, my wrists, my arms, slowly checking everything. I no longer had any wounds, but I am sure that they did not all disappear. I tried to remember everything that happened in the red room, although everything is in fragments. They erased my memory. I'm sure they'll come for me again. I'm a middle-aged guy with a boring routine and a bad habit of digging where I shouldn't. After work, after dinner, after everything that passes for a normal life, I sit in front of my computer and scroll through the deep web. Not for drugs, not for weapons, mostly out of boredom. Shock pages stopped doing anything to me years ago. Most sites try too hard. Fake gore, recycled videos, loud banners screaming that this is the worst thing you'll ever see. It's all empty. It feels made for teenagers pretending to be tough. I kept digging because I wanted something different, something quieter, something that didn't need to shout. That night I found a page that looked wrong because it was calm. White background, clean layout, no music, no pop-ups, just a catalog. The title said, Footwear. Nothing else. No logo, no slogan. Each item was a pair of boots. Same model. Heavy leather, worn soles. Under the picture, there was a name and an age, like Brian 34, Lucas 41. Prices were high, but not insane. What caught my attention was the description, repeated word for word on every product. These boots were used by their respective volunteers. I stared at the screen for a long time before clicking anything. My brain kept trying to turn it into a joke. Art project, dark marketing, some edgy brand playing with ideas of consumption and bodies. But there was no explanation, no about section, no comments. I clicked on one pair. Carl, 29. The boots looked more worn than the others. The leather near the toe was scratched. The sole was uneven, like someone dragged one foot. The size matched mine. That detail bothered me more than it should have. Before buying them, I sat there, hands off the mouse, breathing slow. This was the point where curiosity usually loses to common sense. That pause stretched. The site didn't change. No timer, no pressure, just the boots waiting. I told myself I wasn't hurting anyone by clicking buy. That whatever this was, it had already happened. I paid. The confirmation page didn't thank me. It just said, order received. 3 days later, a plain cardboard arrived at my door. No sender name, no return address. It was heavier than I expected. Before opening the box, I stood in my kitchen for a full minute, listening to the refrigerator hum and the pipes tick. Nothing else. No cars outside, no neighbors. That quiet stretched until my stomach started to feel tight. I cut the tapes and folded the flaps open. Inside were the boots, wrapped in thin paper. Under them, separated by a piece of cardboard, was a black USB drive. No label, no note, just the drive. I picked up the boot first. They smelled old. Not leather store old, used old. The tag was still attached to one lace. Carl 29. On the sole, near the heel, there were dark stains, dried, brownish. I didn't need to guess what it was. My stomach flipped and I leaned over the sink gagging. I didn't throw up yet, but it was close. I dropped the boots back into the box like they were dirty dishes and stepped away. The USB sat there small and harmless. I told myself it was probably a virus, some scam on top of a sick joke. That should have been enough to stop me. It wasn't. I plugged it into my PC. Before opening the file, I muted my speakers and lowered the lights in the room. My hands were shaking, slow and stiff like they didn't belong to me anymore. I stared at the screen for several seconds, breathing through my mouth, trying to keep my stomach under control. There was only one file. No title, no duration. I double-clicked it. A young man appeared sitting on a bare concrete floor. He looked exhausted, dark circles under his eyes. He leaned closer to the camera and spoke. My name is Carl. I'm 29 years old. He swallowed hard before continuing. I don't have enough money to keep my family going. I tried loans. I tried extra work. Nothing worked. This is the only option I have left. He wiped his face with his sleeve, breathing unevenly. They told me this would be quick. They told me my family would be taken care of. Please, please don't judge me. Carl slowly laid down on the floor. His body stiffened. His breathing broke into sobs. I don't want to do this. I don't want to do this. I don't want to do this. From the edge of the camera, legs entered the shot. A woman wearing boots, the same boots sitting in my kitchen. She stopped next to his head. Carl screamed and cried as the boot was lifted. I stopped the video before anything else happened. I ran to the sink and vomited until my throat burned. When I looked back at the box, the boots seemed closer than before. That's when I heard the knock at the door. The knock was polite. 2 taps, a pause, 2 more taps. I didn't move. My heart was slamming so hard it felt like it was pushing against my ribs. I stayed silent, standing in the middle of the kitchen, staring at the door. Another knock came, firmer this time, still calm, still patient. Sir, we just wanted to thank you for your purchase and share a small detail with you. Those boots include a small camera in the toe. You are not the final consumer. You're simply part of the show. We appreciate your collaboration. I backed away from the door and hit the table, knocking the boots to the floor. That's when the door handle started to shake. The knocking turned into heavy hits. Someone slammed their shoulder against the door. I heard glass shatter in the living room. Another window broke. Sounds came from everywhere at once, like people were surrounding the apartment. I slid down the wall and collapsed onto the floor. My chest felt tight and useless. I couldn't stand. I couldn't think. Warmth spread in my pants and I didn't care. I just cried and waited for it to end. Then suddenly it stopped. No footsteps, no voices, just silence. I stayed on the floor for a long time after that. I didn't know how long. When I finally stood up, my legs were numb and shaky. The door was intact. The windows were broken, but nothing else was touched. The boots were still there. I didn't call the police. I didn't tell anyone. I cleaned the mess and threw the box away. I wrapped the boots in trash bags and shoved them into a closet I never use. Days passed. I didn't sleep much. Every sound made me jump. I stopped using my computer except for work. I thought maybe that was it, a warning, a scare. Then an email arrived. It thanked me again. It invited me to a show. There was a link. I stared at it for a long time before clicking. The video loaded fast. It was me, sitting on my kitchen floor, crying, shaking, wetting myself. The angle was low, close to the ground, from the boot's perspective. The comments scrolled beside the video. People laughing, people sending money, tipping, joking. I closed the browser and sat there empty. I understood then. I was never in danger. Not really. I wasn't worth that effort. I wasn't special. I was just another customer. The volunteers were the product. The rest of us were the punchline. No one came back for me. No more emails. No more knocks. Just silence and the knowledge that somewhere people paid to watch me break.
For obvious reasons, I'm not going to reveal my name, but I just want you to know that you should never accept a job without knowing exactly what you're getting yourself into. It all started when Marcus sent me a message a few years ago. I was very surprised because we hadn't seen each other since high school. We grew up together in a working-class neighborhood, but as an adult, his life changed a lot. Marcus became a professional chef and his clients were eccentric millionaires, which allowed him to live a life of luxury, but a very peculiar one. He lived alone in a large mansion far from the city. He was also isolated from everyone else, no longer speaking to his family or friends. I always believed that he contacted me because he felt lonely. He invited me to his place and welcomed me warmly. We started meeting often after that. Always at his place, always him cooking, me sitting at the table eating food that tasted too good for how quiet the room was. He worked from home and said his clients preferred it that way. No meetings, no photos, and no public face. What bothered me wasn't the secrecy, but the absence of people. No friends dropped by, no family called. When I mentioned it, he brushed it off and said distance made things simpler, though his tone didn't sound relieved. He had money, but no life around it. The house felt more like a container than a home, and the longer I stayed, the clearer it became that he had chosen this isolation himself. One afternoon, I arrived earlier than usual. The gate was open, which never happened. I stayed in the car longer than necessary, listening to nothing, feeling stupid for hesitating, and then I finally went inside. Before I even saw him, something felt wrong in a very concrete way. The house wasn't silent like before, it was empty in a heavier sense, like a place after something irreversible has already happened and nothing inside knows what to do next. I called his name while walking through the hallway, forcing my voice to sound normal, and when I reached the living area, I saw him from the ceiling beam, his body still enough to look unreal. The rope was tight, the chair beneath him was tipped over, and there was no sign that anyone else had been there. I stood there longer than makes sense, staring at his face, trying to understand how someone who cooked every day, who planned everything down to the second, could decide to stop like this. His eyes were open, and that detail locked me in place more than anything else in the room. My phone was in my pocket, and I knew exactly what I was supposed to do, but instead I sat down because my legs felt unreliable and my thoughts kept jumping to things that had nothing to do with death, like bills, overdue notices, and how much money I owed. While sitting there, I noticed his wallet on the table, thick with cash and his ID next to it. I didn't grab them right away, I stared at them, then back at him, and understood that whatever I did next was going to follow me for the rest of my life. I stayed in the house that night, not because I felt safe, but because leaving felt worse, like walking away would make everything real in a way I wasn't ready for. I didn't sleep much, and every small sound made me sit up, expecting someone to come looking for him. The next morning, a man arrived, well-dressed, calm, polite, and clearly used to being obeyed. He asked for Marcus without hesitation, and in that moment, my fear wasn't about being caught, but about whether my voice would give me away. I used Marcus's name, and the man didn't react. He spoke about a scheduled job, a private commission, and a payment that had already been transferred. He handed me a device and explained that everything I needed was inside, including instructions and deadlines. After he left, I stood in the kitchen holding that device, aware that the house felt tighter now, less neutral, like it had accepted me but not forgiven me. When I opened the laptop and read the messages, it took time for the meaning to settle because my brain kept trying to simplify what I was seeing. The orders were clear, detailed, and impossible to misunderstand. This wasn't symbolic or implied, it was human meat, described with the same cold precision Marcus used when talking about food. I closed the laptop once, then opened it again because the money attached to those messages was already changing my decisions. Before starting, I spent hours walking around the kitchen, touching surfaces, checking drawers, trying to convince myself there was a version of this where I didn't have to fully understand what I was doing. The equipment was professional, the layout intentional, and every tool felt like it had been placed for this exact purpose. I followed the instructions step by step because thinking beyond them made my chest tighten and my breathing uneven. I focused on timing, temperature, and presentation, the same way Marcus had taught himself to focus, and I understood that this distance was the only way he survived as long as he did. The first delivery went out without issues, and the payment arrived immediately. Seeing that number on the screen didn't feel like relief, it felt like confirmation that I was already too far in to pretend this was temporary. More orders followed, closer together, each one more specific than the last. The clients had preferences and expectations, and their messages carried impatience when deadlines weren't met, as if they assumed compliance was guaranteed. Over time, it became clear that millionaire clients were contacting him through a deep website. It was a very large company dedicated to this type of culinary perversion, and it was an unstoppable business. Late one night, while cleaning the kitchen after another job, I stopped and realized the house wasn't designed to hide this work, it was designed to support it. That's when I understood Marcus hadn't been chasing money, he had been trying to survive something that kept pulling him deeper no matter how much he earned. The weight of it didn't arrive all at once. It built slowly through repetition, through routine, through the realization that stopping wasn't as simple as refusing an order. Every payment solved a problem while creating another one, and I saw clearly how Marcus had ended up alone with it. I started imagining him standing in the same place, making the same calculations, telling himself the same excuses, and I felt closer to him dead than I ever had when he was alive. The isolation wasn't accidental, it was the only way he could live with what he was doing. I finished the last order I had accepted not because I wanted to, but because stopping halfway felt more dangerous than finishing. When the next message arrived, I didn't respond, even though my hands hovered over the keyboard longer than I'd like to admit. Before leaving, I looked at the beam again and understood his choice not as weakness, but as exhaustion that had finally won. The money erased my debts quickly, but it didn't erase habits. I still wake up thinking about deadlines and precision, about doing things exactly the way they're expected to be done. I don't work anymore, and I try to come back to my life with my real name. Some nights, I think about how easy it was to step into his place and how hard it has been to step out of it. I understand now why he couldn't keep going. Whatever I took from that house didn't stay there, and I know I won't ever be the same person again.
The first night I slept alone in that apartment after my parents died, I knew I couldn't do it alone. The place was too big for one person, too quiet, and too expensive, but it was all I had left of them. Money became a problem fast. Bills stacked up, repairs appeared out of nowhere, and my salary never seemed to stretch far enough. I tried ignoring it at first, then I tried cutting expenses, but reality kept pushing back harder every month. Posting the roommate ad felt wrong, like I was opening a door that should stay closed. I told myself it was temporary and that I would be careful, even though I knew I needed more help than I wanted to admit. Sandy answered the ad the same day. She was close to my age, had a steady job, and wrote messages that felt polite and calm. When she came to see the apartment, she looked around slowly, touched nothing, and said it felt peaceful. That word stayed with me. Living together started better than I expected. She paid on time, kept shared spaces clean, and never crossed obvious boundaries. I remember thinking that maybe I had worried for nothing. Sandy had habits, but at first they seemed harmless. She liked routines, liked cleaning late at night, and liked organizing things in neat lines. It felt normal enough. Then the jars appeared gradually. Inside them were tiny objects, pins, hair, ties, buttons, and even insects. I noticed them one evening and asked her about it casually, trying not to sound judgmental. She smiled and said she liked keeping things that others ignored. She said it helped her feel in control and that she had been doing it for years. The way she spoke was soft and careful, like she was choosing each word. Over time, some of the objects felt familiar. A hair tie I was sure I had lost. A makeup item I couldn't find anymore. When I asked her about those, she said she found them around the apartment and kept them so they wouldn't be wasted. I told myself I was being dramatic. She wasn't aggressive, she wasn't rude, and she never touched my things in front of me. Still, something about the way she watched me while I spoke made me feel exposed, like she was memorizing me instead of listening. The shift happened slowly, but once I noticed it, I couldn't stop seeing it. Things I threw away didn't stay gone. Used tissues, broken earrings, and old makeup wipes started appearing in jars inside her room. Before confronting her, I stood outside her door longer than I should have. It was slightly open and I could see rows of jars lined up carefully. She had dates written on them, and some had my name. My chest tightened, and for the first time, I locked my bedroom door that night. When I asked her directly, my voice shook, even though I tried to keep it calm. She didn't deny it, and she didn't apologize either. She said she kept pieces of me because people disappear and objects are more reliable. From that point on, fear became practical. I double-checked doors, paid attention to sounds, and avoided leaving personal items unattended. Sandy noticed the change and became more aggressive, more present, and more emotional. Before every strange incident, there was silence. Not peaceful silence, but the kind that made me stop whatever I was doing and listen. That silence always came right before something was missing or out of place. I started sleeping lightly, waking up at the smallest sound and pretending everything was fine during the day. The problems really escalated when I met Elliot. We met at a small cafe I used to stop at after work. One afternoon, he sat at the table next to mine because the place was crowded, and the conversation started in a simple way. I told Sandy about Elliot during dinner, trying to sound casual. I mentioned that we met at a cafe and that we liked each other. Her reaction was immediate, even if she tried to hide it. She stopped eating and stared at me like she was processing bad news. She asked questions that felt too specific and too focused. I could tell she was holding something back. After that night, her collecting escalated. She no longer hid it. I found jars in the bathroom and the kitchen, holding things I never wanted to see again. When I confronted her, she cried and said she loved me. Before she begged me not to kick her out, there was that silence again, heavy and expectant, like the apartment was listening. She said I was making a mistake, that Elliot would leave me, and that she was the only one who would never hurt me. Her words didn't sound angry. They sounded convinced. I told her she had to leave. My voice was weak, my hands were cold, and my mind was racing, but I knew I couldn't keep living like that. After Sandy left, Elliot moved in, and for a short time, I felt safer. I didn't tell him everything, but I told him enough to explain why I checked locks and windows every night. The first time I saw Sandy again, she was across the street watching the building. She didn't wave or approach me. She just stood there wearing a jacket that looked exactly like mine. Before each encounter, my phone would go silent. The street would feel empty, and I would feel that same pressure building in my chest. She followed us. She appeared at my house all the time. She screamed things about Elliot that made my skin crawl, saying he lied and that she knew because she watched. One night before anything happened, I woke up for no clear reason. The room was quiet and I could hear Elliot breathing next to me. That silence stretched until I realized we were not alone. Sandy was standing by the bed, holding scissors and a glass jar. She had already cut some of Elliot's hair, and she was focused, slow and careful. When she looked at me, she smiled like she was finishing a task. When Elliot pushed her away, she screamed my name and lunged at him, swinging the scissors close enough to cut skin. We fought her together, panicked and clumsy until she ran. The restraining order came later, along with promises that didn't mean much. A year and a half passed, and life almost felt normal again. Almost. But one day in work, when I reached my desk, there was a small glass jar sitting perfectly centered on my desk. I didn't touch it at first. That silence returned, thick and heavy, pressing against my ears. Inside the jar was a human finger. I didn't scream. I couldn't. I just stood there shaking, knowing exactly who had left it and what it meant. The police arrived later, but by then, I already understood that Sandy never stopped collecting. I'm trying to move out of the apartment. Selling it felt like giving up, but staying felt worse. Elliot left too. The restraining order still exists, but it doesn't stop her from watching. Sometimes things still disappear. Sometimes I find jars where they don't belong, and I know Sandy is still out there, saving pieces of me.
I moved into that apartment thinking only about rent and classes, unaware of how much damage it would cause. I had arrived alone with little money and no margin to fail, so sharing rent was the only option I had. I had moved to the city yesterday to begin my university studies, ready to change my life forever. And that's what happened. Paul moved in the next day. He didn't greet me like someone excited to meet a roommate, but like someone checking who else had entered his territory. He was thin, quiet, and always tense, as if his thoughts were running faster than his body. He went straight to his room and locked the door without explaining anything. Later that night, we talked in the kitchen. He spoke softly and avoided eye contact, but his words came out heavy. He told me he had moved because something followed him, something that watched and waited. He said he needed rules, locks, and silence. I thought he was unstable, and that scared me more than anything supernatural. The first days passed with an uncomfortable routine. Paul barely left his room, and when he did, he moved fast, checking doors and windows before sitting down. He talked about dark energies, about being watched, and about how whatever followed him was patient. I listened, but only because ignoring him felt rude, not because I believed a word of it. Before anything strange happened, there was a pattern of pauses. Moments when Paul stopped mid-sentence and listened, moments when he asked me to lower my voice for no clear reason. He said silence mattered, and that noise attracted attention. I joked about stress and exams, but he didn't respond. One afternoon, I came back from campus and found a kitchen cabinet open. I closed it and continued unpacking, but when I turned around, it was open again. I checked the hinges and told myself it was just old furniture, even though I had closed it carefully. That night, I heard footsteps in the hallway long after Paul had gone to his room. They were slow, deliberate, and stopped exactly outside my door. I waited for him to knock or speak, but nothing happened. After a long minute, the steps moved away and I stayed awake until morning. From that point on, fear stopped being an idea and started becoming physical. I felt it in the way my shoulders stayed tight and in how I avoided looking down the hallway at night. Sounds started happening when Paul was not home, which made it impossible to blame him or his paranoia. Before the bathroom door opened by itself, there was a silence so complete that it felt intentional. No traffic, no pipes, no distant voices, just the sound of my breathing getting louder as I stood frozen in the hall. I watched the handle turn slowly as if someone was testing my reaction. The door opened fully and stayed that way. I stepped back, my mind racing through explanations that did not fit what I was seeing. I did not run because my legs refused to respond, and I did not scream because no sound came out. When it finally stopped, nothing followed, and that made it worse. I told Paul everything that night. He listened without interrupting, nodding like he had been waiting for this moment. He said it had noticed me now, and that once it did, it never let go easily. His voice cracked when he said that, and for the first time, I saw real fear in his face. After that, the apartment changed. Cabinets emptied themselves onto the floor, plates shattering one by one while we stood there unable to move. Lights flickered long enough to make us doubt whether they were about to go out or explode. Paul started sleeping with his door open, saying it was safer to see it coming. The worst escalation happened on a night when neither of us had the energy to argue or pretend anymore. We sat in the living room with the lights on, barely speaking, both aware that the quiet felt loaded. Paul kept glancing toward the hallway as if expecting something to step out. Before the lights went insane, there was pressure in my head and a low electrical hum that made my teeth hurt. The television volume dropped on its own, and the clock reset without warning. Paul told me not to stand up, and I could hear panic breaking through his controlled tone. Every door in the apartment slammed shut, one after another, each impact echoing through the walls. The front door shook violently and Paul started begging, promising anything it wanted if it would just stop. I stayed seated because my body felt heavy and useless. That was when I saw it. A dark figure pressed against the living room window, taller than any person should be, with no visible face or shape beyond a solid black mass. It leaned closer and the glass bent inward as if it might give. I fell backward, hitting the floor hard, unable to look away. When the lights came back, it was gone. Paul was shaking uncontrollably, laughing and crying at the same time, repeating that I finally believed him. I packed a bag that night, but he grabbed my arm and told me it would not let me leave. I spent the night outside, sitting in a library until morning, replaying everything in my head. Paul sent me messages filled with warnings, apologies, and broken sentences. He said it stood in his room and whispered, and that it knew my name. Before I returned, my chest felt tight, and every step toward the apartment felt heavier than the last. I told myself I was just there to get my things, but deep down, I knew something was wrong before I even opened the door. The smell reached me before anything else, sharp and out of place, like it didn't belong inside a home. The apartment was silent, not calm, but arranged as if the quiet itself had been prepared in advance. I called Paul's name once, then again, and moved toward his room, stopping when I noticed a chair lying on its side near the doorway. Before I looked up, I heard a soft creaking sound above me. When I finally raised my eyes, I saw Paul suspended from the ceiling beam. His body wasn't still or straight. His body was twisted unnaturally, his hands tied behind his back. The scene didn't make sense, and the more I looked, the more wrong it felt. I stood there longer than I should have, trying to understand what I was seeing. The room felt tighter the more I looked. The police said that he took his life. They did not listen when I told them about the figure or the doors or the warnings. They wrote it down, thanked me, and left. I did not stay in the apartment another minute. I moved into a dorm surrounded by people, noise, and light, but none of it helped. The same signs followed me, subtle but familiar, always starting small. The doors remained open, objects moved slightly, and electronic devices malfunctioned at the same time every night. Before I accepted it, there was denial. I blamed stress, grief, and lack of sleep. That illusion broke the night I heard footsteps outside my dorm room that stopped exactly where Paul's had stopped before. I went back once during the day to retrieve the last of my belongings. In Paul's old box, I found notes, drawings, and a list of addresses with one name circled at the bottom. Mine. There was no final confrontation, no escape through strength. I left the city and disappeared into another place, hoping distance mattered. I don't talk about Paul, and I don't try to prove anything anymore. At night, I listen carefully not because I want to hear it, but because I know it listens to me. Sometimes there is a soft tap on the window that I pretend not to notice. I am still here because that entity has not decided to finish yet, and that knowledge is the only thing that truly scares me. I know I will be next.
The first night in that room, I understood something was wrong, even before anything actually happened. My name is Marie, and I just started university. New campus, new rules, new people. Everything was new. The dorm room was supposed to be nothing more than a shared box where I slept and changed clothes. I never thought it would become the center of everything. They assigned my roommate at random. Her name was Anne. She was already there when I arrived, sitting on her bed with a book on her lap and her desk perfectly organized. She looked at me and smiled and said hello in a soft, careful voice. Everything about her looked controlled. From the beginning, we were nothing alike. I moved fast, left things around, and treated the room like a place I passed through. Anne treated it like something sacred. She didn't say much that first day, but she watched everything I did, like she was taking notes. At first, the tension stayed hidden behind normal roommate problems. She asked me to clean more. She reminded me about quiet hours. She adjusted things I had just placed somewhere else. I rolled my eyes and ignored most of it. Then she started commenting on my life. She asked why I went out so much, why I came back late, and why I brought boys into the room, even when they never stayed long. Her voice stayed calm, but her words felt sharp. Anne was deeply religious. Every night she knelt by her bed and prayed out loud. She didn't ask if it bothered me. She talked about protection, about sin, about sharing space with someone who walked a dangerous path. I pretended not to listen, but I heard everything. Before the situation turned openly hostile, there was a period where nothing exploded, but everything felt tight. She stopped smiling. She stopped small talk. She started watching the clock in the door. That was when the room stopped feeling neutral. Things changed the day she confronted me directly. She told me that my behavior offended God and that my presence made it hard for her to feel safe. She said she couldn't focus, couldn't sleep, and couldn't pray properly with me there. She didn't shout, but her eyes stayed locked on mine. Before the first real incident, there was a stretch of days where Anne barely left the room. She skipped meals, classes, and stayed at her desk reading religious texts. Every sound I made felt amplified, like I was breaking a rule just by breathing too loudly. One morning, I woke up to her screaming my name. She was standing in the middle of the room holding a photo frame with both hands. The picture of her family had been turned face down on her desk. She kept asking who touched it, over and over, without waiting for an answer. She went straight to housing and asked for a room change. When they denied it, she came back shaking and locked herself in the bathroom. I could hear her crying and praying through the door, begging for forgiveness and protection. That was the first time I felt something close to control. From that day on, Anne treated me like a threat. She checked the door lock repeatedly. She asked me where I'd been every time I entered. She flinched when I moved too fast. The fear in her face became constant, and I noticed how much power that gave me. Before anything else happened, there was always a moment where I could feel her tension filling the room. She moved slowly, spoke quietly, and avoided turning her back on me. That constant alertness made everything heavier, and it pushed me further instead of stopping me. I told myself it was just payback. I said I needed to teach her to stop judging me. I never admitted that I enjoyed seeing her scared, even though I clearly did. Before the first joke, I stood outside the room and listened to her praying inside. Her voice cracked when she spoke, and she asked God to remove the evil influence from her life. That was when I decided exactly what to do. I hung a naked doll from the closet rod while she was in class. When she came back and saw it, she froze in the doorway. She whispered prayers under her breath and backed away slowly, like the thing might move on its own. The next day, I drew a pentagram on the floor with ketchup. She dropped to her knees trying to clean it, crying while scrubbing the stain. She asked me why I was doing this and begged me to stop. I told her she was imagining things. Anne stopped sleeping properly after that. She kept the light on all night. She taped crosses to the walls and lined her desk with religious objects. She refused to be alone in the room with me, but she had nowhere else to go. Before each new prank, I felt a rush building in my chest. I waited for the right moment, watched her routines, and planned where things would hurt the most. The fear on her face became predictable, and that made me bolder. By then, the jokes were no longer harmless. I left taboo dolls outside the door. I scratched symbols into her notebooks. I hid her belongings and watched her panic when she couldn't find them. She stopped eating properly and lost weight fast. Anne confronted me one night, standing by her bed with tears running down her face. She said she was afraid of me. She said something dark followed me everywhere I went, and that I enjoyed hurting her. Her voice shook, but she didn't look away. Before that final night, the room felt unbearable. She prayed nonstop. She whispered verses under her breath, even during the day. Every movement I made her jump, and that constant fear fed something ugly inside of me. That night, I picked up the knife without fully planning to. The room was dark and she was asleep. I stood there for a long time, listening to her breathing, waiting for a reason to stop. I didn't stop. When she woke up and saw the knife, she screamed and tried to get away. I told her I was Lucifer, that she had been right all along. She fought back, but I was faster. I cut her face, tied her hands and feet, and carved the symbol into her skin while she cried and prayed. I didn't stop when she begged. I hit her until she stopped moving. The sound she made stayed in my head long after everything went quiet. Someone heard the noise. Campus security arrived quickly. I didn't run. I dropped the knife and sat on the floor, shaking and breathing too fast. I couldn't look at her. Anne survived, but barely. Her face was scarred, and her body took weeks to recover. She never came back to campus. They arrested me that night. I didn't fight it. I didn't explain myself. There was nothing left to explain. Prison is quieter than my dorm room ever was. My new roommate keeps her distance and watches me carefully. She doesn't talk much. At night, I lie on my bed and think about shared spaces, thin walls, and how easy it is to break someone slowly.
They found us after 43 days, but it was too late to save what we had been. The rescue team saw our eyes and knew something was wrong. We looked at them with hunger, not relief. Our bodies had changed in ways that cold and starvation alone could not explain. We were still breathing, still alive, but we were not human anymore. The ski trip was supposed to last 4 days. 8 of us rented a cabin in the Rocky Mountains for a weekend trip. The avalanche hit on day 2, burying the road under 30 feet of snow. We were not worried at first. We had enough food for a week, and our company knew where we were. They would send help when the weather cleared. But the weather did not clear. The storm got worse, became something that felt wrong, like it had a purpose. The wind screamed in sounds that almost seemed like words in a language older than the mountains. Snow fell so thick, the world outside our windows disappeared completely. It felt less like we were snowed in and more like we had been moved to another place where normal survival rules did not work. The food ran out on day 9. When it was gone, the thin line that separates humans from animals disappeared too. We tried to wait for rescue, but the hunger was not patient. It did not build slowly. It attacked like a living thing, turning our bodies into vessels that existed only to feed, only to satisfy a need that had nothing to do with nutrition and everything to do with something old that the cold and isolation had woken up inside our blood. Jessica died on day 12 from the cold, even though we tried to keep her warm. We buried her body in the snow outside because the cabin was too warm and we needed her to stay frozen. Nobody said out loud what we were all thinking. That burial was temporary, that hunger was patient, that eventually we would have to choose between dying with our morals or living with the knowledge of what we ate. I was the first to suggest it. That shame will follow me forever. I told the others that Jessica would have wanted us to survive, that her body was just meat now and her soul was already gone. The others agreed too fast, with almost no argument, and I realized we had all been waiting for someone to say it out loud so we could pretend we did not really want to do it. The first time was horrible. Every bite made us sick and cry and pray to gods we no longer believed were listening. But the second time was easier. The third time I noticed I was taking bigger pieces, getting angry when others tried to slow me down, feeling rage that there was not more. That was when I started changing. The hunger stopped being about survival and became something else, something that felt ancient and awake in ways I had never felt before the snow trapped us. By day 20, we had eaten 3 people from our group. The 5 of us who were left stopped pretending we were victims forced into terrible choices. We were hunters now, waiting for the next person to get weak, to fall asleep and not wake up, to provide the meat our changed bodies needed. I started seeing the others differently, not as friends, but as either threats to my food or as food themselves. I caught them looking at me the same way, calculating who would be next. The dreams started around day 30. I dreamed about running through the forest on all fours, fast and graceful in ways no human body should move. Hunting things that ran in terror because they understood what I had become. I would wake from these dreams, sad to find myself still stuck in the cabin, still wearing human skin that felt like a costume I was forced to keep on, still pretending I wanted rescue when what I really wanted was to stay in the wild forever and let the change finish. When the rescue team finally broke through on day 43, they found 2 of us left, me and Daniel. We were surrounded by bones we had picked clean and then crushed to get the inside parts. Our bodies were thin, but somehow stronger. Our eyes reflected light in ways human eyes should not. Our teeth were sharper, our nails harder, and our hunger was not satisfied even after eating 6 people over 6 weeks. They took us to a hospital where doctors tried to treat us for starvation and trauma, but the tests kept coming back wrong. They showed changes to our bodies that made no sense, changes to our bones and brain that suggested we were becoming something else, something that looked human but was no longer human underneath. The psychiatrists said the isolation and cannibalism had broken our minds, but I knew better. I could feel what was happening. I could sense the Wendigo spirit the old stories warned about, the curse that turns anyone who eats human flesh in the wild into something that can never stop being hungry, never stop hunting, never go back to what they were before they learned what forbidden meat tastes like. They let me go after 6 months with required therapy and medicine that was supposed to stop the bad thoughts and help me fit back into normal life. But the hunger never stopped. Some nights I wake up standing at my window, staring at the street below, looking at the people walking past, thinking about how easy it would be to satisfy the need that grows stronger every day. I know that eventually the curse will win. When it does, I will go back to the mountains where this started, back to the wild that made me. And I will become what that cave and that hunger and those 43 days were always meant to turn me into. Something that waits in the snow for the next group of lost travelers who think survival is the worst thing that can happen, before they learn that some things you survive become worse than death. His profile appeared on Tinder like a fantasy made real. Alexander was 35, successful, with photos showing him in expensive suits, standing in front of private jets and luxury hotels. His bio mentioned international business consulting, frequent travel, and a passion for fine dining and adventure. In a sea of gym selfies and poorly written bios, he stood out as someone who had actually achieved something, someone who could offer the kind of life I had only seen in movies. We matched on a Thursday evening in March, and his first message was thoughtful rather than crude, commenting on a book I had mentioned in my profile and asking if I had read the author's latest work. We talked for hours that first night, the conversation flowing easily from literature to travel to our dreams for the future. He seemed cultured, intelligent, attentive in ways that made me feel valued rather than just another potential hookup. When he suggested we meet for dinner that weekend at one of the city's most exclusive restaurants, I said yes without hesitation. The date was perfect. Alexander arrived in a black Mercedes, dressed impeccably, and treated me like I was the most important person in the world. He ordered wine I could not pronounce, told stories about business deals in Dubai and meetings in Singapore, painted a picture of a life so glamorous it felt unreal, and maybe that should have been my first warning, that it felt too much like a movie, too polished to be genuine. But I was swept up in the romance of it all, in the idea that someone so successful and worldly would choose to spend time with me. Over the next month, our relationship accelerated at a pace that should have alarmed me. Alexander said he was falling in love, that he had never met anyone who understood him the way I did, that he wanted to build a future together. He introduced me to what he claimed were business associates, took me to events where everyone seemed to know his name, showered me with gifts that must have cost thousands of dollars. When he asked to borrow money for a temporary cash flow problem, explaining that his funds were tied up in an overseas investment and he needed to cover an urgent business expense, I did not hesitate. I transferred $20,000 from my savings account, money I had been putting away for years because I trusted him completely. The money disappeared, and so did Alexander. His phone went straight to voicemail. His text messages stopped delivering, and when I drove to the address he had given me for his apartment, I found it was a short-term rental that had been vacant for weeks. The restaurant where we had our first date had no record of the reservation he claimed to have made. The business associates I had met were actors he had hired for a few $100s each. Everything about Alexander, from his name to his success to his feelings for me, had been an elaborate fabrication designed for one purpose, to gain my trust and steal my money. But the scam did not end when the money was gone. 2 weeks after Alexander vanished, I started receiving messages from him again, this time threatening rather than romantic. He said I owed him more money, that the $20,000 was just a down payment on a debt I had agreed to, and if I did not pay, he would ruin my reputation. He sent emails to my employer claiming I had embezzled funds. He posted fake reviews online using my name and photo, making it seem like I was involved in fraudulent business practices. He created social media accounts impersonating me, sending inappropriate messages to my friends and family members. The harassment became relentless. He somehow gained access to my bank accounts, draining what little money I had left and leaving me unable to pay rent or buy groceries. He used information I had shared during our month together, details about my family and my past and my insecurities, to craft messages that cut deep and left me feeling exposed and violated. When I went to the police, they told me that romance scams were common but difficult to prosecute, especially when the perpetrator operated across state lines and used multiple fake identities. I hired a private investigator with money I borrowed from my parents, desperate to find out who Alexander really was and how to stop him from destroying my life. What we discovered was terrifying. Alexander was not one person, but a network of scammers who worked together, sharing information about their victims, coordinating attacks, moving money through untraceable channels. The man I had fallen in love with did not exist, had never existed, was just a character played by someone whose real name and face I would never know. The psychological damage was worse than the financial loss. I stopped trusting my own judgment, second-guessed every interaction. became paranoid that everyone around me had hidden motives. I deleted all my dating profiles, withdrew from social situations, spent months in therapy trying to rebuild the sense of self that Alexander had systematically destroyed. Even now, 3 years later, I still feel the sting of that betrayal, still wonder how I could have been so blind to the signs that were probably there all along. Because the truth is that people like Alexander prey on normal human desires for connection and love and security. They study their victims, learn what we want to hear, become exactly the person we have been searching for. And by the time we realize it was all a performance, they have already taken everything we had and disappeared into the digital void, leaving behind nothing but debt and trauma and the haunting knowledge that the person we loved never existed at all. I have been walking in circles for 3 days, and I know the forest is doing it on purpose. Not random disorientation or panic-induced confusion, but deliberate manipulation, like the trees are moving when I am not looking and the paths are folding back on themselves to keep me trapped here with whatever is watching from the shadows that grow longer even at noon. It started as a simple day hike, a well-marked trail I had walked a dozen times before in the White Mountains of New Hampshire. I knew every landmark, every turn, every scenic overlook where I usually stopped to take photos. But 4 hours into what should have been a 6-hour loop, I reached a clearing I had never seen before. A perfect circle of dead grass surrounded by trees that leaned inward like they were trying to hear something being whispered at the center. My compass started spinning then, the needle rotating continuously without stopping, and my phone showed no signal despite being fully charged with a battery that had been at 90% when I checked it 20 minutes earlier. I told myself it was just equipment malfunction, that I should backtrack to the last familiar landmark and reorient from there. But when I turned around, the path I had just walked down was gone, replaced by dense undergrowth that looked like it had been undisturbed for decades. That was when I heard it for the first time. A sound like branches scraping against each other but forming patterns that almost resembled words in a language I did not recognize but somehow understood at a level deeper than conscious thought. The message was simple and terrible. I was not supposed to be here, but now that I had entered this place, I could not leave until something was satisfied, some ancient bargain was fulfilled, some hunger that had been waiting was finally fed. I ran then, crashing through underbrush and ignoring trails entirely, trying to find any landmark that would orient me toward civilization. But every direction led to the same clearing, that perfect circle of dead grass that seemed to grow larger each time I returned, as if the forest was slowly digesting the living world and replacing it with this emptiness. By nightfall, I understood I was not going to escape, and I built a fire more for psychological comfort than warmth because the temperature had not dropped the way it should have, staying precisely at the edge where cold becomes painful, but not dangerous. The thing came to the edge of my firelight around midnight. I did not see it clearly, just an impression of something tall and impossibly thin, limbs that bent at too many joints, and a head that was wrong in ways my brain refused to process, editing the memory even as I tried to look directly at it. It did not speak, but I heard its voice inside my skull. Not words, but feelings and images. Hunger that had existed for centuries, patience that made human lifespans irrelevant, and the certain knowledge that I was already dead, that my body just had not understood this fact yet. I must have passed out because I woke at dawn back in the clearing, my fire reduced to cold ash, even though I had fed it enough wood to burn until morning. My supplies were gone, my backpack empty except for a single item I had not packed, a small carved figure made from what looked like bone, shaped like a human but elongated and wrong, with too many ribs and a skull that came to a point like something designed for burrowing. The second day, I found other campsites. Not abandoned ones from previous hikers, but active sites with tents and gear and fires that were still warm, except nobody was there and all the tents were open from the inside like the occupants had left voluntarily in the middle of the night. I called out but got no response except that scraping branch sound that was forming more coherent words now, still in that language I should not understand but did, telling me that I had been chosen, that the forest needed something from me. that if I wanted to leave, I would have to become what it required. The third day, I stopped trying to escape. Not because I accepted my fate, but because I realized the forest had been slowly changing me since I arrived, and the hunger I felt was not for food, but for something else, something that made me understand why those other campsites were abandoned and where their occupants had gone. They were still here, transformed into something that could exist in this place between the living forest and the dead clearing, and I could feel myself joining them, my thoughts becoming less human and more like the scraping branches, my body forgetting how to be warm-blooded and learning to thrive in the cold that never quite became freezing. I'm writing this on the last page of my journal because some part of me that is still human wants to leave a warning, even though I know nobody will ever read it, that this journal will stay in this clearing forever along with all the other belongings of people who thought they were just going for a hike and discovered too late that some forests are not places you visit but traps you enter, and the only way out is to stop being the thing that wants to leave and become the thing that makes others want to stay. If you find this, do not look for me. I am already gone, and what is using my shape now is not something you want to meet on a trail that should not exist, in a forest that rearranges itself to collect people who wander just slightly off the marked path, in a clearing that grows larger with every soul it consumes until eventually it will swallow the entire mountain, and everyone will wonder why that area of the map shows nothing but blank space where trees and trails used to be.
I never imagined that sharing a home with someone could become the darkest chapter of my life. I'd recently moved to a quieter part of Germany to focus on writing, and I needed a place that was peaceful and inexpensive. That's how I met Armin. He came off as intelligent, articulate, and surprisingly gentle. He wore sweaters with elbow patches, had neatly combed hair, and a voice so calm it could almost lull you to sleep. He told me that he worked as a tech. His house was warm and organized, with bookshelves lined with philosophy, psychology, and cookbooks. It seemed like I'd lucked out. He offered me the guest room, and by the end of the week, I was already unpacking. At first, everything was normal. Armin was polite, a little quiet, but he respected my boundaries. We'd occasionally have dinner together, and he'd talk about recipes he'd learned from his mother. Once, he made a stew that was so rich and savory that I asked for the recipe. He smiled, but he didn't answer. I didn't push it. He always said cooking was more instinct than formula. At the time, I thought he was just eccentric. I never suspected the truth. The horrifying, stomach-turning. One evening, while using his computer to send an email, I noticed a folder on his desktop. It wasn't labeled anything out of the ordinary, but inside were chat logs. Dozens of them. I clicked out of curiosity. What I found made my body go cold. Messages from a forum called Cannibal Cafe. Explicit conversations about abducting, butchering, and eating people. Some of the messages were just fantasy, sure, but Armin, he wasn't just fantasizing. He was participating. He was organizing. In one thread, he talked about preparing long pig in ways that mimicked gourmet cuisine. The language was too casual, too calculated, like he'd rehearsed it 100 times in his head. When I confronted him, I expected denial, maybe anger. But he didn't even flinch. He admitted everything, not in a guilty, fearful way. Calmly, softly, like he was telling me about his grocery list. He said he was searching for someone who wanted to be eaten, as if that made it better. As if consent could cleanse the blood off the walls. I couldn't speak. My mind was racing with images I didn't want to see. I moved out the next day without a word. It didn't end there. Months passed. I tried to forget what I'd seen, tried to convince myself maybe it was just twisted fantasy and nothing more. Then the news broke. German man arrested for killing and eating a willing victim. My heart stopped. It was Armin. He had met a man online named Bernard Branzis. They chatted for weeks before finally agreeing to meet. Bernard traveled to Armin's house fully knowing what would happen to him. The two had dinner together. Then Bernard swallowed sleeping pills and painkillers while Armin filmed the entire thing. The footage later showed Armin amputating part of Bernard's body while he was still alive. When Bernard passed out from blood loss, Armin stabs him in the throat, hung the body on a meat hook, and butchered him like livestock. He stored the flesh in his freezer and consumed it slowly over the next 10 months. I watched the trial on TV, unable to look away. Armin appeared collected, almost proud. At first, he was only convicted of manslaughter. The court didn't know how to treat a murder where the victim had given full consent. Later, they retried him and sentenced him to life in prison. But no cell, no verdict could erase the fact that a man had not only committed this crime, but that another man had willingly signed up for it. I think about it all the time, about how close I was. If I hadn't found those chat logs, if I'd ignored the weird comments, if I'd eaten another one of his dinners, would I have become the next course? Would my name have been reduced to a mention in a courtroom, a freezer label in a nightmare? Evil doesn't always come with snarls and shadows. Sometimes it speaks softly. It opens a door for you. It offers you wine, makes you dinner, and waits. If you want more real horror stories that you won't believe are true, make sure you're following, because the next one might even be closer to home.
As a parent, you think the only two places where your kid is safe are either the home which you build for the kid or the school in which he or she goes to learn new things. But what would you do if you realized either of these places was unsafe for your kids? What would you do if you realized predators were lurking behind smiling faces and sweet words? This is the story of a teacher who fell in love with her student, and she fell so hard that he landed her directly behind bars. In the year 1991, my daughter Lola went to school with a kid named Ricky Hugo. Ricky and Lola were both in the 2nd grade when they met the loving Miss Lucia Smith. Not only was Lucia an excellent teacher, she was like a third parent to all the kids in her class. She cared for them and loved them all. Parents, including me, were happy that such a woman was teaching our kids. She was a 30-year-old woman who came from a Catholic background and was always smiling and nurturing towards our kids. But when she noticed little Ricky, she immediately saw his unique artistic abilities. She started taking more and more interest in him compared to other kids. But this was normal for teachers to have their favorite students. No one seemed to take offense to it, as it was just a student-teacher relationship. However, when Ricky, Lola, and other 2nd grade students graduated from Miss Lucia's class, she decided to keep in touch with Ricky. She used to often meet him, buy him art supplies, and take him to parks and zoos. She almost treated him like one of her own children. Miss Lucia was married to her high school sweetheart and shared 2 wonderful kids with him. She was already a mother of 2 when she met little Ricky, and she often thought that Ricky might be a good partner for her daughter. However, as the years passed, the relationship between Ricky and Miss Lucia grew even stronger. And finally, when Ricky was in standard 6th, he was once again in Miss Lucia's class. Till then, they both knew each other pretty well. The townspeople thought that Miss Smith was so keen on helping Ricky due to his less than normal family life. On one hand, Miss Lucia's family was an ideal nuclear family. Ricky's wasn't. When Ricky and my daughter Lola were in the 6th grade, I remember inviting Ricky to Lola's birthday party, and he showed up there with Miss Lucia. It was weird that she had driven him to the party instead of one of his parents. Miss Lucia seemed very close to him, almost acting as his mom. But I did not read into the situation much back then. I just let the boy into the party and said goodbye to the teacher. However, almost a week later, there was news traveling throughout the town like wildfire. Apparently, the cops had caught Ricky and Miss Lucia in her car doing indecent things. This had shaken the ground beneath my feet, as Miss Lucia was famous in town for being a good teacher and, more importantly, a good human. So at first, a lot of other parents whose kids had been in Miss Smith's class at one point in time refused to believe this news. I remember having a conversation with my husband and denying the fact that Miss Smith was a bad person. But my husband had friends in the police department, and he knew that Miss Lucia was not who we believed her to be. Miss Lucia and Rick had gotten out of the situation with the cops. But soon after that, she started having problems in her marriage. No one knew what the reason was, but everyone suspected it was Ricky. That time, too, I refused to believe that a 12-year-old kid was the reason why a 34-year-old woman and her husband were having marriage issues. Soon after that, the news spread in town that Miss Lucia and her husband were splitting. We all saw the once cheerful and kind-hearted woman break in front of our eyes. She was still working as a teacher and was nice as ever with all her students. But we all knew she was hurt and breaking from the inside. A few months passed, and it was nearing the end of 6th grade when Miss Lucia began to show. We all noticed that she was pregnant. The whole town was baffled, and no one knew who the father of her kid was, until the cops came knocking on her door and arrested her. Arrested her for what? I asked my husband when he told me the news. I and my husband were having tea in the evening on our patio while my kids played in the front yard. You do not know what was going on, do you? My husband asked. No, I don't, Marcus. So please tell me, why did the cops arrest this nice lady? Because she sexually assaulted a kid from her 6th grade class. While saying that, he was looking straight at Lola, who was busy playing with her little brother. The teacup I was holding crashed to the ground. Who? A kid named Ricky. She was always with him and took great interest in him. That's the reason her husband left her. They also say that he knocked her up, but right now it's a mess. The kid's mother somehow got to know that the teacher was having an affair with her child and called the cops. Chances are Miss Lucia will go to jail. Marcus, that's awful. It creeps me out that a predator dressed as a sheep was teaching our kids for so long. What if it was one of our kids? My husband placed a hand on my shoulder and consoled me, telling me not to worry. But that night, I couldn't sleep. I was so disgusted and terrified at the same time. I mean, what 34-year-old person is attracted to a 12-year-old child? The next day, I decided to visit the teacher and know the truth for myself. So I visited her in her rental apartment on the outskirts of the town. When I knocked on her door, she was surprised to find me there. Miss Stevenson. Hello, Miss Smith. May I come in? Sure. Please don't mind the state of my apartment. Lucia asked me to come inside. Her apartment was a bit of a mess. Would you like to have some water? She asked. No, thank you. Instead, I was wondering if I could speak to you for a while. She looked skeptical at first, but then sat down opposite me. How are you? She was not expecting that. She was probably expecting me to accuse her. I'm as okay as I can be, given the circumstances. Is it true? I wanted to hear it from her, as I still believed her to be a good person. She looked at me for a few moments and then buried her face in her palm and began sobbing. He gets me. He understands me, she said. Who? Ricky. I know this may sound very bizarre to all, and I know it almost seems very unnatural and predatory, but it's true. We love each other. I was disgusted by listening to her. Was she that delusional to think a 6th grader could understand her complex emotions? But I still wanted to know the whole truth. How did it happen? Can you tell me if you don't mind? We were close since he was in 2nd grade, and we just kept getting closer. We understood each other. He knew I was having troubles in my marriage, and neither was his home life perfect. It just happened. One evening, I got a call from Ricky, and he was so disturbed. I drove to his place and picked him up. We went to school. One thing led to another, and we kissed. I wanted to stop after the kiss, but that didn't happen. We couldn't stop. Soon I was pregnant, and my husband and I had finalized our separation. Rick's mom became suspicious and confronted me. I couldn't deny her claims, and here we are. Here I am, pregnant, and about to go to jail for loving someone. She said all this while tears rolled down her rosy cheeks. I knew this woman needed help, and I was even more disgusted by her. I could not take it anymore, and I walked out of her place. Later that month, her trials began in the court, and almost all of the town was present there. She pled guilty to rape and eventually went to jail. However, the most disturbing part was the fact that Ricky too said he was in love with her. She had groomed the 12-year-old, and it was evident that the kid needed help too. Eventually, in jail, Lucia gave birth to her and Ricky's 2 daughters. It was really an unusual case. Ricky's family got custody of the 2 newborn girls. By the time Lucia was out of jail, Ricky was 21, and it was as if no time had passed at all. They were still in love, but this time, the law could not stand in their way, as both of them were consenting adults. Ricky and Lucia got married soon after and began raising their kids away from the public eye. Their case had received enough media attention as it is. I, like the many other parents, did not know how to feel about the situation. I did not know whether I was to be disgusted or happy. After 12 years of happy marriage, Ricky finally filed for legal divorce from his former teacher and wife, Lucia. But soon after that, Lucia was diagnosed with cancer and passed away at the age of 58. Even then, her entire family, including her ex-husband Ricky, was by her side. And in her will, she left most of her wealth to him. If you guys found this story shocking, please let me tell you that it is not just a weird fictional tale. It's based on a true incident that happened in 1995. The real name of Ricky is Vili Falau, and the name of the infamous teacher was Mary Kay Letourneau.